In 1875, Josephine Hale traveled thousands of miles to marry a man who promised her a future. But when she arrived in a dusty Texas frontier town, she discovered he'd already married someone else. Stranded, penniless, with nowhere to go, she was betrayed in front of the entire town. Then a rugged rancher named Caleb Turner made her an offer: marriage, but not for love. Just survival. What started as humiliation became something nobody expected. This is her story. If you want to see how far this journey goes, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, throwing up a cloud of dust that hung in the still Texas air like a dirty curtain. Josephine Hale gripped the edge of the wooden seat, her gloved hands trembling despite her best efforts to appear composed. Through the grime-covered window, she could see the town, if you could call it that. A collection of weather-beaten buildings lined a single dirt road, their paint peeling under the relentless sun. This was Cedar Bend. This was supposed to be her new home. She'd spent 3 weeks on trains and coaches to get here, leaving behind everything she'd ever known in Philadelphia. Her mother had cried. Her father had looked relieved. One less mouth to feed, one less daughter to worry about. Josephine had convinced herself it was an adventure, a chance at something better. Thomas Brennan's letters had painted such vivid pictures. A prosperous ranch, a comfortable home, respect and partnership. The door swung open and the driver's weathered face appeared. "Cedar Bend, miss. End of the line." Josephine gathered her carpet bag and accepted his hand, stepping down onto the dusty street. Her traveling dress was rumpled, stained with sweat and dirt from the journey. She'd wanted to arrive looking dignified, but 3 weeks of rough travel had other ideas. "Where can I find the Brennan Ranch?" she asked. The driver scratched his jaw, his expression suddenly uncomfortable. "Brennan? That'd be about 5 miles north, but— Miss Hale?" Josephine turned. A tall man in a suit that had seen better days approached, his hat in his hands. Behind him, a woman in a fine green dress watched from the boardwalk, her face partially hidden by a parasol. "Yes, I'm Josephine Hale." The man cleared his throat. "I'm Deputy Marshal Webb. Mr. Brennan? He asked me to meet you." Something in his tone made Josephine's stomach drop. "Is something wrong? Is Thomas hurt?" "No, ma'am. Well, there's been a development." Webb shifted his weight, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. "Mr. Brennan got married 3 weeks ago, to Miss Catherine Wardlow, Mrs. Brennan now, I suppose." The words didn't make sense at first. Josephine heard them, but her mind refused to arrange them into meaning. "Married? Yes, ma'am. He wanted me to give you this." Webb extended an envelope. His hand shook slightly. Josephine took it. Her fingers had gone numb. Around them, people had stopped to watch. A woman whispered to her companion behind a hand. 2 men outside the saloon had turned to stare. Even the shopkeeper had come to his doorway. She opened the envelope. Thomas's handwriting. She recognized it from his letters, though these words were rushed, careless. "Miss Hale, I regret the unfortunate timing. My circumstances changed unexpectedly. Catherine's father offered a partnership that benefits my ranch considerably. I've arranged a room for you at the boarding house for 1 week, after which I trust you'll make arrangements to return east. Enclosed is $50 for your trouble. Thomas Brennan." $50. For her trouble. Josephine looked up at Deputy Webb. "He's not coming? He sent you instead?" "I'm real sorry, ma'am. He thought it would be easier this way." "Easier?" The word tasted like ash. "For him, I imagine it is." The woman in the green dress had moved closer. She was young, maybe 19, with perfect ringlets and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You must be the Philadelphia girl. Thomas mentioned you might arrive before he could send word. How dreadfully unfortunate." There was nothing unfortunate in her tone. She sounded satisfied. "Catherine," Webb said quietly, a warning. "Mrs. Brennan," the woman corrected, touching the new ring on her finger. Thomas felt terrible, of course, but surely you understand, business opportunities wait for no one. And we are quite happy together. She tilted her head, studying Josephine like an unpleasant specimen. "You've had such a long journey for nothing. How exhausting that must be." Josephine's vision had narrowed to a tunnel. Her ears rang. She'd given up her job at the textile factory, sold her mother's silver locket, the only valuable thing she owned, to afford better traveling clothes. Spent every cent she had on the journey because Thomas had promised to reimburse her upon arrival. "Miss Hale?" Webb touched her elbow. "Let me take you to the boarding house. Mrs. Fletcher runs a respectable place." "Yes," Josephine heard herself say. "Thank you." She let him guide her down the street, away from Catherine Brennan's triumphant smile and the staring townspeople. The boarding house was a 2-story building with faded blue paint and a sagging porch. A hand-painted sign read, "Fletcher House, clean rooms, fair rates." Webb knocked, and a moment later, a gray-haired woman with flour on her apron answered. "Henry? What's—" "Oh." Her gaze moved to Josephine, and understanding flashed across her face. "You're the girl from the letters. Mrs. Fletcher, this is Miss Hale. Brennan's arranged a week's stay for her." "Has he now?" Mrs. Fletcher's mouth compressed into a thin line. "Come in, dear. You look about ready to fall over." The interior was dim and smelled of baking bread. Mrs. Fletcher led them to a small sitting room where dust motes danced in the afternoon light filtering through lace curtains. "I'll get you some tea," Mrs. Fletcher said. "Henry, a word?" They stepped into the hallway, but their voices carried. "That bastard," Mrs. Fletcher hissed. "Bringing a girl all this way and then—" "Mind your language, Ellen. Don't you defend him. Everyone knew he was courting Miss Wardlow, but he kept writing to that Philadelphia girl, making promises. And why? Because Catherine's father wanted 6 months to think on the partnership. Thomas Brennan didn't want to wait, so he hedged his bets. Kept this poor thing dangling until he got what he wanted." "Ellen, 1 week? 1 week's lodging and $50? That won't even get her home." Josephine stared at the carpet. It had a pattern of faded roses. Someone had mended a worn spot near the center with thread that didn't quite match. She focused on that imperfect repair because if she thought about anything else, she might scream. Mrs. Fletcher returned with tea and hard eyes. "Drink this. Then I'll show you to your room." "Thank you." Josephine's voice sounded distant, mechanical. "How much does passage back to Philadelphia cost?" Mrs. Fletcher and Webb exchanged glances. "About $90, Webb said quietly. "Maybe 80, if you take the slower route." Josephine had $12 in her purse. 50 from Thomas made 62. She was $28 short, minimum. And she'd need money for food during the journey, for a place to stay when she arrived, until she could find work. If she could find work, respectable factories didn't hire women who'd left previous positions without notice. "I see," Josephine said. Mrs. Fletcher sat beside her, her work-roughened hand covering Josephine's. "You'll stay here as long as you need. We'll figure something out." "I can pay for a week." "I'm not talking about payment." Mrs. Fletcher's tone was fierce. "That man should be horsewhipped. You're not the first girl he's used this way, though you're the first who actually showed up. 2 years ago, he had some poor thing from St. Louis sending him money for ranch improvements. When she ran dry, he stopped writing." Webb shifted uncomfortably. "We can't prove that, Ellen." "Can't prove the sun rises either, but it does." Josephine set down the teacup. Her hands had steadied now, though she wasn't sure if that was composure or shock. "Is there work in town? Anything?" "Not much," Webb admitted. "There's the saloon, but that's not—" "Absolutely not," Mrs. Fletcher cut him off. "I won't have you even suggesting it." "What about shops? A general store? Someone must need help." Mrs. Fletcher's expression was pitying. "Cedar Bend's not that kind of town, dear. Most folks run their own businesses with family, and the ones who don't—" She hesitated. "They're not keen on hiring outsiders, especially not women on their own. People talk." "They're already talking." Josephine had seen the stares, heard the whispers. "That they are, and I'm sorry for it, but taking work would make it worse. They'd say you were, well, they'd say unkind things about why a woman would travel so far to marry and then not go home when it fell through." Josephine understood. They'd say she'd come for gold digging, that she'd thrown herself at Thomas and been rejected, that she was desperate, loose, looking for any man. Then what am I supposed to do? Neither of them had an answer. That night, Josephine lay in the small room Mrs. Fletcher had given her and stared at the ceiling. Moonlight crept through the thin curtains, painting silver lines across the cracked plaster. Downstairs, she could hear Mrs. Fletcher moving around, the soft clink of dishes being washed. She should cry. That's what a proper woman would do. cry and pray and hope for deliverance. But Josephine's eyes were dry. Behind them, her mind raced through calculations. $62. 80 needed, minimum, 18 short. And that was if she spent nothing for a week. If she ate nothing, bought nothing, did nothing, she could write home. Ask her father for help. No? He'd refused to lend her the money for the journey in the first place. Said if she was so set on marrying a stranger, she could manage on her own coin. Her mother might have slipped her something, but her mother had nothing of her own. Everything belonged to father. Josephine rolled onto her side, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. The room was cold. Texas was supposed to be hot, but at night the temperature dropped fast. The wind outside rattled the window in its frame. She'd been so careful in Philadelphia, worked 10 hours a day at the textile factory, saved every penny she could, never bought sweets or ribbons or any of the small luxuries other girls allowed themselves. She'd been practical, sensible, and it had meant nothing. One man's lie and 3 years of careful planning dissolved like sugar in rain. Sleep, when it finally came, brought no comfort. Morning arrived with harsh sunlight and the smell of coffee. Josephine dressed in the only clean dress she had left, a gray cotton that had been respectable once but was now merely adequate. She pinned up her dark hair, noting that her face looked thinner in the small mirror, older. 3 weeks of travel had carved shadows under her eyes. Downstairs, Mrs. Fletcher was frying eggs. Sit down, you need food. I should sit. Josephine sat. Mrs. Fletcher put a plate in front of her, eggs, bread, and 2 strips of bacon. Real bacon, not the scraps Josephine had eaten in boarding houses along the way. I can't afford. Didn't ask if you could. Mrs. Fletcher poured coffee. Eat. The food was good, too good. Josephine's throat tightened with a gratitude she didn't want to feel. Charity had never sat well with her. There's church this Sunday, Mrs. Fletcher said, sitting across from her with her own cup of coffee. You should come. Let people see you're respectable. Will it matter? Probably not, but it won't hurt. Mrs. Fletcher's expression was both kind and brutally honest. This town's small and it's got a long memory. Thomas Brennan's family has been here since Cedar Bend was founded. You're the stranger who showed up expecting to marry into that. They'll decide you were either a fool or a schemer, and neither one's favorable. Which do you think I am? Neither. I think you're a woman who got dealt a bad hand by a man who should have known better. Mrs. Fletcher sipped her coffee. But my opinion's not worth much. I'm just the boarding house keeper. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Fletcher opened it to reveal Deputy Webb and another man, tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and a face that looked carved from the same rough stone as the land itself. He wore work clothes, dusty and worn, and his hat was in his hands. Morning, Ellen, Webb said. This is Caleb Turner. He wanted to speak with Miss Hale. Mrs. Fletcher's eyebrows rose. Did he now? Caleb Turner didn't speak. He just looked at Mrs. Fletcher with steady gray eyes until she stepped aside. In the sitting room, she said. I'll be right here. Josephine stood as they entered, her heart hammered for no reason she could name. Turner was maybe 35, with lines around his eyes and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He looked like a man who'd spent his entire life fighting wind and sun and land. Miss Hale. His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. I'm Caleb Turner. I run a ranch about 8 miles northeast of here. Mr. Turner. Josephine's back was rigid. I'm afraid if you've come to satisfy curiosity, I came to make an offer. That stopped her. Excuse me? Webb shifted uncomfortably. Caleb, maybe you should... Marriage, Turner said, cutting him off. His gaze hadn't left Josephine's face. I need a wife. You need a situation. Seems practical. The room went silent. Mrs. Fletcher's coffee cup hovered halfway to her lips. Webb looked like he wanted to disappear through the floorboards. Josephine found her voice. You're proposing to me. I'm proposing a partnership. We've never met. Met you now. Turner's expression didn't change. I've got a ranch, 400 acres, cattle, horses. House needs work, but it's sound. I need someone to help run it. Someone organized and capable. You fit the bill. How would you possibly know what I... Ellen says you kept your head yesterday when most women would have fallen apart. Says you asked about work first thing, not about who to blame or how to get revenge. That tells me you're practical. He paused. I need practical. Josephine's mind reeled. This is insane. Maybe, but here's what I'm offering. A roof, food, protection, and a share of the ranch. Equal partner. You work. You get half of everything. We build it together. In exchange for what? Running the house, helping with the books. I'm not good with figures. Cooking, cleaning, the usual. But also ranch work when needed. I can't afford to hire help, so it'll be the two of us doing everything. You're describing a servant who gets to sleep in the main house. Turner's jaw tightened. I'm describing a partner who happens to be married to me. There's a difference. Is there? You'll have your own room, he said flatly. I'm not asking for that. Not unless you decide otherwise. This is business. Mrs. Fletcher made a small sound. Webb was staring at Turner like he'd lost his mind. Josephine crossed her arms. Why me? You could marry any woman in this territory. Could've, haven't. Turner's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Most women here want romance, want to be courted proper, with flowers and pretty words. I don't have time for that. I need help now, and I need someone who won't quit when the work gets hard. You traveled alone from Philadelphia to get here. That takes grit. It takes desperation. Same thing sometimes. Josephine wanted to argue, but couldn't. He was right. Think about it, Turner said. He put his hat back on. I'll be at the saloon tonight if you want to talk more. If not, I'll know you're not interested. He walked out without another word. Webb followed, throwing an apologetic glance back at Josephine. Mrs. Fletcher set down her cup. Well, that was unexpected. He's insane, Josephine said. Her voice shook. Completely insane. Probably, but he's also honest. Mrs. Fletcher leaned back in her chair. Caleb Turner's had that ranch for 7 years. Bought it with money he saved from working cattle drives. Built the house himself. He's known for being fair in business and keeping his word. That doesn't mean I should marry him. No, but it means if you did, he'd keep his promises. Mrs. Fletcher's gaze was direct. You need options, dear. Right now, you don't have many. Josephine spent the day in her room, pacing. The walls felt like they were closing in. Outside, she could hear Cedar Bend going about its business, wagons creaking past, someone hammering at the blacksmiths, children's voices rising in play. She thought about Philadelphia, the cramped apartment she'd shared with her parents and 3 younger siblings. The factory floor, hot and loud, her fingers bleeding from handling rough fabric 12 hours a day. Coming home to her father's disappointment at her wages, her unwed status, her very existence. Thomas's letters had offered an escape, a chance to build something of her own, to be valued. Instead, she'd found humiliation. And now Caleb Turner was offering, what? Another gamble? Another promise that might dissolve the moment she relied on it? But it wasn't the same. Turner hadn't promised romance or comfort. He'd offered work, partnership. A brutal kind of honesty that at least couldn't be mistaken for something it wasn't. As the sun set, Josephine made her decision. The saloon was quieter than she'd expected. A few men played cards in the corner. The bartender, a heavy-set man with impressive mutton chops, polished glasses behind the counter. And at a table near the back, Caleb Turner sat alone with a whiskey he hadn't touched. Every head turned when Josephine entered. Women didn't come into saloons. Not respectable women. Good thing her respectability was already in question. She walked straight to Turner's table. I have conditions. He looked up, unsurprised. All right. May I sit? He nodded to the chair across from him. Josephine sat, ignoring the stares burning into her back. First, she said, keeping her voice low, I want my own money, not an allowance. Actual money that's mine to spend or save as I see fit. Fair. $10 a month to start. More when the ranch starts turning better profit. Second, I want legal documentation. Something that says I own half. If you die, I don't want your family taking everything. I'll have a lawyer draw it up. You'll sign as co-owner. That surprised her. You'd actually do that. Said I would. Turner's gaze was steady. I don't lie, Miss Hale. Saves time. Third, if this doesn't work, if I want to leave, you'll pay for my passage home. wherever I decide home is. Turner was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Agreed. But I've got a condition too. Which is? You give it a real try. Not half-hearted, not one foot out the door. If you're in, you're in. Work the ranch, build it with me. If after a year you still want to leave, I'll pay passage. But you've got to give it a year. A year. 12 months of her life bound to a stranger. But what was the alternative? Charity from Mrs. Fletcher until the money ran out? Crawling home to Philadelphia in disgrace? Finding work in another town where she had no connections, no recommendations, no safety? 1 year, Josephine said. And if I do leave, I want half of whatever profit the ranch has made during that time. Turner's mouth twitched, almost a smile. You drive a hard bargain. You're getting a full partner. I'm making sure I'm treated like one. Then we're agreed. He extended his hand across the table. Josephine looked at it. Rough, scarred, weathered from work. An honest hand, if such a thing existed. She shook it. His grip was firm but not crushing. We'll marry Saturday, Turner said. Judge Hawkins can do it at the courthouse. Short ceremony. Saturday? That was 4 days away. No point waiting. I've got cattle to move next week, and I'll need your help. He finally picked up his whiskey, drained it in one swallow. You'll want to buy supplies before we head to the ranch. Fabric, thread, whatever you need. Put it on my account at Morrison's General Store. I can use my own money. Ranch business. It's our account now. He stood, dropping coins on the table. I'll pick you up Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Josephine sat alone at the table, her hand still tingling from his handshake. Around her, the saloon slowly returned to its business, though glances still flickered her way. She'd done it. She'd agreed to marry a complete stranger. The thought should terrify her. Instead, she felt a strange, cold calm. This wasn't romance. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd let herself imagine with Thomas. It was a business arrangement, clear-eyed and practical. Maybe that was better. At least she knew where she stood. The next 3 days passed in a blur. Mrs. Fletcher, despite her initial shock, threw herself into preparations with determined efficiency. If you're going to be a rancher's wife, you'll need proper clothes, she declared, dragging Josephine to Morrison's General Store. The store was dim and cluttered, every surface covered with goods, fabric bolts, canned food, tools, ammunition. If you needed it, Morrison's had it, provided you didn't mind searching. Mr. Morrison himself was a thin man with wire spectacles and a suspicious expression. Mrs. Fletcher, Miss Hale, is it? It is. We're here to purchase supplies. On the Turner account. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Turner? Caleb Turner? That's what the man said. Mrs. Fletcher's tone brooked no argument. She'll need fabric for practical dresses, work boots, and... Is it true? Morrison interrupted, staring at Josephine. You're marrying him? Saturday, Josephine said evenly. But you were supposed to... He stopped, flustered. Marry Thomas Brennan. Yes, plans changed. Josephine met his gaze without flinching. Do you have the supplies or not? Morrison nodded slowly. I'll get what you need. As he moved to gather items, Josephine heard voices from outside. Through the window, she saw Catherine Brennan and 2 other women standing in the street, heads together, glancing toward the store. Mrs. Fletcher saw them too. Don't pay them any mind. Kind of hard not to. Catherine's jealous, Mrs. Fletcher said quietly. Always has been. She might have gotten Thomas, but she knows the Turner Ranch has better land, better water. If Caleb makes it work, and he will, he'll be twice as prosperous as Brennan in 5 years. So she thinks I'm, what, stealing her prize? She thinks you're getting what should have been hers. Catherine had her sights set on Caleb before Thomas came along. But Caleb never looked twice at her. Morrison returned with an armload of fabric, sturdy cotton, wool for winter. Boots are in the back. What size? Josephine told him. He disappeared again, leaving her and Mrs. Fletcher alone among the shelves. Did you love him? Mrs. Fletcher asked suddenly. Thomas? Josephine considered lying, but what was the point? I don't know. I loved the idea of him, the possibility. But the real man? She shook her head. I never knew the real man. That's the truest thing I've heard in weeks. Mrs. Fletcher squeezed her hand. This thing with Caleb, it's not romantic, but it's honest, and sometimes honest is more valuable than pretty words. Morrison returned with boots, heavy leather work boots, nothing like the delicate shoes Josephine had worn in Philadelphia. She tried them on. They fit. Anything else? Morrison asked. Gloves, Mrs. Fletcher said. Work gloves. And a decent hat. Sun here will burn her to blisters otherwise. They left with packages wrapped in brown paper. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, Catherine Brennan moved to intercept them. Josephine. She smiled, saccharine sweet. I heard the most extraordinary rumor. Surely it's not true. Which rumor would that be? That you're marrying Caleb Turner, after being here less than a week. Catherine's eyes glittered. It seems rather desperate. Catherine, one of her companions murmured, embarrassed. But Catherine pressed on. Thomas feels terrible, of course. He worries you might be making a rash decision out of spite. Something hot flared in Josephine's chest. Thomas Brennan can feel whatever he likes. It's no concern of mine. But to marry a man you don't even know. At least Caleb Turner told me the truth from the beginning. Josephine stepped closer, voice dropping. He didn't make promises he had no intention of keeping, didn't lead anyone on while he waited for a better offer. So yes, I'm marrying him. Saturday. You're welcome to attend if you'd like to see how a man of integrity behaves. Catherine's face flushed red. You have no right. I have every right. Thomas made his choice. I made mine. The difference is mine isn't built on lies. She walked away before Catherine could respond, Mrs. Fletcher hurrying to keep up. Well, Mrs. Fletcher said once they were out of earshot, that felt good, didn't it? Shouldn't have said it. But Josephine's hands were shaking with something that felt like victory. Oh, you absolutely should have. Been wanting to say something to that girl for years. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. Josephine dressed in her best remaining dress, dark blue with a simple collar. She'd washed and pressed it the night before, though it still showed signs of wear. Mrs. Fletcher had offered to do her hair, pinning it up in a style that was both practical and pretty. There, she'd said, standing back to admire her work. You look like a bride. I look like a woman about to sign a business contract. Same thing sometimes. Now Josephine stood in the boarding house parlor, her small trunk packed with everything she owned. It wasn't much. 2 dresses, underclothes, her mother's Bible, kept out of habit more than faith, and the supplies from Morrison's. A wagon pulled up outside. Through the window, Josephine saw Caleb Turner climb down. He'd dressed up, clean shirt, vest, a jacket that actually fit. His hair was combed back and he'd shaved. He looked almost civilized. Mrs. Fletcher opened the door before he could knock. Morning, Caleb. Ellen. He nodded to her, then to Josephine. You ready? As I'll ever be. He picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing, carrying it out to the wagon. Josephine followed, Mrs. Fletcher close behind. You take care of her, Mrs. Fletcher said to Turner, her voice fierce. And you? She turned to Josephine, pulling her into a sudden tight hug. You're stronger than you know. Don't forget that. Josephine's throat closed. Thank you. For everything. Write to me. Let me know you're all right. I will. Turner helped her up onto the wagon seat. The leather was worn smooth, and the whole thing smelled like dust and horses. He climbed up beside her, taking the reins. Judge Hawkins is expecting us, he said. Should only take about 20 minutes. They rode through town in silence. People stopped to stare. Josephine kept her chin up, refusing to look away. Let them stare. Let them judge. She'd made her choice, and she'd live with it. The courthouse was a simple wooden building at the edge of town. Judge Hawkins met them at the door, an older man with kind eyes and tobacco-stained fingers. Caleb, Miss Hale. He shook both their hands. Come in. The ceremony was brief. Judge Hawkins read from a worn book, asked if they consented, and pronounced them married in less than 5 minutes. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, just the 3 of them in a dusty office, sealing a practical arrangement with legal words. You'll want this, Judge Hawkins said, handing Turner a marriage certificate. Legal proof, in case anyone questions. Thank you, Judge. Turner folded the paper carefully, tucking it into his jacket. They walked back to the wagon. Turner helped Josephine up again, and they started out of town, heading northeast. Josephine watched Cedar Bend disappear behind them. She felt nothing. No regret, no fear, no excitement. Just a strange, hollow calm. "You all right?" Turner asked after a while. "I don't know yet." He nodded like that made perfect sense. "Ranch is about an hour from here. Land gets rougher as we go." "Tell me about it." "The ranch." So he did. As they rode, Turner described the property in practical terms: acreage, water sources, grazing land. The house was small, he admitted. 2 bedrooms, a main room, kitchen. He'd built it himself 6 years ago, working between cattle drives. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it's solid." "I don't need fancy." "Good, because you won't get it." He glanced at her. "This life, it's hard. Harder than city living, and it's lonely sometimes. If you're expecting neighbors and social calls—" "I'm not expecting anything," Josephine interrupted. "Expectations are what got me into this mess." Turner's mouth twitched. "Fair enough." The land changed as they traveled. Flatter country gave way to rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and mesquite. In the distance, Josephine could see cattle grazing. The sky stretched overhead, impossibly vast and blue. It was beautiful, harsh and empty and beautiful. "There," Turner said, pointing. Josephine saw it. A house set against the hills, weathered wood that had gone gray in the sun. Nearby stood a barn, a small corral, and what looked like a chicken coop. It was isolated, alone in all that empty land. It looked like the end of the world. It looked like a chance. "Welcome home," Turner said. Josephine took a breath. "Yes, I suppose it is." The wagon creaked to a stop in front of the house, and Josephine climbed down before Turner could offer his hand. Her boots hit the dust-packed earth with a solid thud. Up close, the house looked smaller than it had from a distance. Rougher, too. The wood was weathered gray, and one of the shutters hung crooked. But the structure was sound. She could see that much. Turner hefted her trunk onto his shoulder. "I'll show you inside." The front door stuck a little when he pushed it open, swollen from last week's rain. The interior was dim and smelled like coffee and wood smoke. As her eyes adjusted, Josephine took in the main room. A stone fireplace along one wall, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves holding tin plates and cups. Everything was functional. Nothing was decorative. A door on the left stood open, revealing a small bedroom. Through another doorway, she could see what must be the kitchen. "Your room's there." Turner nodded to a closed door on the right. "Mine's the one you saw. Kitchen's through there, though I mostly cook out here by the fire. Easier." Josephine walked to her bedroom and opened the door. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window with no curtain. The mattress looked lumpy, and there was a water stain on one wall where the roof had leaked. But it was hers. Her own space. "I know it's not much," Turner said from behind her. "It's fine." She turned to face him. "When do we start work?" His eyebrows rose slightly. "You want to start today?" "You said you need help." "I'm here to help." Something shifted in his expression, not quite approval, but close. "All right, I need to check the cattle in the north pasture. Lost 2 calves last week to coyotes. You can come with me, see the property. Give me 10 minutes to change." Josephine closed the door and unpacked her new work dress. The sturdy brown cotton Mrs. Fletcher had insisted on. It was rougher than anything she'd worn in Philadelphia, but it fit well and wouldn't show every speck of dirt. She changed quickly, lacing up the heavy work boots that already felt strange on her feet. When she emerged, Turner had saddled 2 horses. One was a big sorrel gelding, the other was smaller, a gray mare with intelligent eyes. "You ride?" Turner asked. "I did when I was younger. My uncle had a farm outside Philadelphia. I spent summers there." "Good. This is Dove." He handed her the gray mare's reins. "She's steady, won't throw you unless you do something real stupid." Josephine approached the mare slowly, letting her catch her scent. Dove nickered softly, nudging her shoulder. "Hello, girl." "She likes you." Turner swung up onto the sorrel with easy grace. "That's a good sign. Dove's particular about people." Josephine mounted with less grace but managed to get settled in the saddle without embarrassing herself. Her thighs protested immediately. It had been years since she'd ridden. They rode out across the property, Turner pointing out landmarks. That line of cottonwoods marked the creek. Those hills in the distance were the western boundary. The cattle had grazing rights on the open range beyond, but the core 400 acres were deeded land. "How many head?" Josephine asked. About 150 right now. Should be closer to 200, but lost some over the winter. Disease, predators, rustlers. Rustlers? Not organized, just opportunistic. Drifters who figure one or two cows won't be missed. Turner's jaw tightened. They're wrong. They crested a hill, and suddenly Josephine could see cattle scattered across the valley below. Dark shapes against the pale grass, moving slowly as they grazed. There they are. Turner pulled up, surveying the herd with a practiced eye. See that group near the creek? Those are the new mothers. Stay close to water. How do you keep track of them all? Brand them, count them regular. Notice when something's off. He pointed to a cow standing apart from the others, head low. Like that one. See how she's not grazing? Could be sick. Need to check her. Check. They rode down the hill, and as they approached, the sick cow lifted her head. Josephine could see even from a distance that something was wrong. The animal's eyes were dull, and she was breathing hard. Turner dismounted, approaching slowly. Easy, girl. Let me see what's wrong with you. The cow tried to back away, but she was weak. Turner got close enough to examine her, running his hands along her sides. Bloat. Not bad yet, but getting there. Need to treat her now, or we'll lose her. What causes it? Too much fresh grass, usually. Ferments in the gut. Builds up gas. Can kill them if it gets bad enough. He straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. We'll need to bring her back to the barn. Can you ride behind the herd and keep them from following while I drive her? I can try. Don't try. Do it. But his tone wasn't harsh. They'll want to follow because she's part of their group. Your job is to turn them back. Dove knows what to do. Trust her. Josephine positioned herself as Turner instructed. When he started driving the sick cow away from the herd, several others immediately tried to follow. Dove moved before Josephine could react, cutting in front of the strays and turning them back with a series of quick pivots. Good, Turner called. Just like that. Stay with them. It took 20 minutes to separate the sick cow and drive her back to the barn. By the time they got there, Josephine's legs were screaming and her back ached, but she'd done it. She'd actually helped. Turner got the cow into a stall and started preparing medicine, some kind of oil mixed with other ingredients Josephine didn't recognize. Hand me that funnel on the shelf. She found it and passed it over. Turner inserted it into the cow's mouth and poured the mixture down her throat. The animal fought, but he held her steady with calm, practiced movements. That should do it, he said, stepping back. We'll check her tonight. If she's not better by morning, might need to try something else. What if she dies? Then we lose a cow. Turner's expression was matter of fact. Happens. Part of ranching. You do your best, and sometimes it's not enough. They unsaddled the horses and turned them into the corral. Josephine's hands fumbled with the buckles. Her fingers had gone clumsy from fatigue. You did good today, Turner said, not looking at her as he brushed down his sorrel. I barely did anything. You didn't complain, didn't slow me down. That's more than most manage their first day. He hung up the brush. You hungry? Josephine realized she was starving. They'd eaten nothing since breakfast at Mrs. Fletcher's. Yes, I'll make something. Inside, Turner built up the fire and set a pot of beans to warm. He sliced salt pork into a pan and fried it until it crisped. The smell made Josephine's stomach growl audibly. There's bread in the tin, he said. From Mrs. Morrison. She sends some over every couple weeks. Feels sorry for me, I think. Josephine found the bread, dense and dark, but fresh. She set the table, finding plates and cups. It felt strange, this domestic routine with a man who was now her husband, but felt like a stranger. They ate in silence at first. The beans were good, seasoned with something savory. The pork was salty and satisfying. After the physical work, every bite tasted better than anything she'd eaten in weeks. You know how to cook? Turner asked eventually. Basic things, enough to feed a family. That's more than I can do. I can make beans, fry meat, boil coffee. Anything else is beyond me. He sopped up bean juice with bread. If you can do better, I won't stop you. I'll need supplies, flour, sugar, lard, vegetables if you have them. Root cellar's out back. Got potatoes, carrots, onions. Take what you need. We can get other supplies in town next week. After dinner, Turner showed her the rest of the property. The chicken coop held a dozen hens and a rooster who eyed them with deep suspicion. The barn was bigger than it looked, with stalls for horses and cows, plus storage for hay and equipment. This is where we'll keep the sick ones. The new mothers who need watching, anything that needs special care, Turner explained. Most of the herd stays out on the range, but we bring them in for branding, doctoring, sorting. When's branding? Late spring, few months yet. He looked at her directly. It's not easy work. Long days, hot, loud. Cattle don't enjoy it, and they let you know. I'll manage. Probably you will. He pulled the barn door shut. Sun's going down. We should turn in. We start early here, around 5. 5 in the morning. Josephine hadn't woken at 5 since her factory days. All right. Back in the house, Turner banked the fire and lit a kerosene lamp. The yellow light threw shadows across his face, making him look older, harder. Your room should have everything you need, he said. If it doesn't, let me know. I will. Thank you. An awkward pause stretched between them. This was their wedding night, but there would be no celebration, no intimacy. Just two exhausted people going to separate rooms. Well, good night then, Turner said. Good night. Josephine went to her room and closed the door. She changed into her nightgown by the light of the moon coming through the uncurtained window. The bed was as lumpy as it looked, but after the long day she barely noticed. Sleep came fast and heavy. She woke to the sound of someone moving around outside her door. Gray pre-dawn light filtered through the window. For a moment, Josephine didn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. The marriage, the ranch, the new life she'd agreed to. She dressed quickly in her work clothes and emerged to find Turner already building up the fire. He'd made coffee, and the smell was almost enough to make her forgive the early hour. Morning, he said. There's bread for breakfast. We'll have a real meal at midday. They ate standing up, drinking the bitter coffee and eating dry bread. Then Turner handed her a pair of leather gloves. Today we're mending fence in the east pasture. Cattle keep getting through, and if they wander onto Brennan's land, there'll be trouble. The mention of Thomas Brennan made Josephine's spine stiffen. He'd cause problems over stray cattle? He would. And his new father-in-law would back him up. Wardlow's got influence in Cedar Bend. Turner's expression was neutral, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Best to avoid giving them ammunition. They rode out as the sun rose, painting the hills gold and orange. The fence line ran along the eastern boundary, and even Josephine could see where the problems were. Posts leaning, wire sagging, or broken in places. We'll start here, Turner said, dismounting near a section where 3 posts had rotted through. I'll dig new holes. You can clear away the old wire. It was hard, tedious work. The old wire was rusted and sharp, catching on her gloves and dress. Turner dug with steady mechanical efficiency. His shirt soon soaked with sweat despite the cool morning air. They worked mostly in silence, broken only by occasional instructions. Careful of that end, it's still got tension. Hand me the hammer. Hold this steady while I nail it. By midday, Josephine's back ached and her hands hurt despite the gloves. They'd replaced 6 posts and restrung 40 feet of wire. Turner surveyed their work with satisfaction. Good progress. We'll finish this section tomorrow. He wiped sweat from his face. Let's head back. You need to rest before evening chores. I'm fine. You're not. You're moving stiff, and you've got blisters forming. He caught her hand before she could pull away, turning it over to examine her palm even through the glove. Thought so. We'll wrap those when we get back. At the house, Turner produced a tin of salve and strips of clean cloth. He wrapped her hands with surprising gentleness, his rough fingers careful not to press too hard on the tender spots. You don't have to prove anything, he said, not looking at her face. First week's always the hardest. Your body needs time to adjust. You hired me to work. I married you to be a partner. Partners look out for each other. He tied off the bandage. Push yourself too hard now. You'll be useless later. That helped nobody. Josephine wanted to argue, but he was right. Her whole body felt like one big bruise. What are evening chores? Feed the horses, check on that sick cow, collect eggs, make sure everything's secured for the night. Takes about an hour. I can do that while you make dinner. Turner's mouth quirked. You want to split duties? Makes sense. We both work, we both cook, alternate days. All right, but I'm warning you, my cooking's not going to improve. Then you'll have incentive to let me have more turns. He actually smiled at that, a brief flash of humor that transformed his whole face. Smart woman. That evening, Josephine collected eggs from hostile chickens, who pecked at her bandaged hands and complained loudly about her presence. She checked the sick cow, who seemed slightly better, less labored in her breathing. The horses nickered when she brought them hay, and Dove pushed her nose into Josephine's shoulder with friendly insistence. When she came back inside, Turner had managed to produce something that might generously be called stew, mostly potatoes and onions with a few sad chunks of meat floating in thin broth. "Told you I wasn't any good," he said, ladling it into bowls. "It wasn't good, but it was hot and filling, and after the day they'd had, that was enough." Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a routine. Up before dawn, morning chores, work on whatever project needed doing, fence mending, cattle checking, equipment repair. Midday break, more work, evening chores, dinner, sleep. The days blurred together, each one backbreaking and exhausting. Josephine's hands toughened. Her muscles stopped screaming and started merely aching. She learned to read the cattle's behavior, to spot a sick animal before it got bad, to handle a horse without getting bitten or stepped on. She learned that Turner was a man of few words but consistent actions. If he said he'd do something, he did it. If he gave his word, he kept it. She learned that he woke sometimes in the night, pacing the main room, that he drank his coffee black and hated beans despite eating them constantly, that he could go an entire day speaking maybe 20 words but would talk for an hour about cattle breeding or grass quality if asked. And she learned that the ranch was in worse shape than he'd admitted. The herd should have been bigger. The equipment should have been newer. There should have been hired help for spring branding. One evening after dinner, Josephine brought out the account books Turner had mentioned. He'd piled them on a shelf and apparently hadn't looked at them in months. "Let me see these," she said, spreading them across the table. Turner looked uncomfortable. "Numbers aren't my strength. That's why you married someone organized." Josephine lit the lamp brighter and started going through the ledgers. It was worse than she'd thought. Turner had been selling cattle at terrible prices, buying supplies at inflated costs, and missing payments on the land loan that had helped him buy the property. "You're getting cheated," she said flatly, looking up at him. "Morrison's charging you 20% more than standard rates. And whoever bought your cattle last fall paid half what they were worth." Turner's jaw tightened. "I know I'm not getting good deals, but there's not many buyers out here, and Morrison's the only general store within 20 miles. Then we go to the buyers, make them compete for the cattle." Josephine tapped the ledger. "And we buy supplies in bulk from the wholesaler in Fort Worth. It'll mean a longer trip, but we'll save enough to make it worthwhile. That's 3 days' travel, each way. So we go twice a year instead of buying weekly from Morrison." She met his eyes. "You hired me to help run this ranch. Let me do it." Turner was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. Next cattle sale, we do it your way. But if it doesn't work, it'll work." He almost smiled. "That confident?" "I spent 3 years managing a factory floor with 50 women, making sure supplies came in on time and orders went out correctly. I can handle a few cattle sales. Those women ever try to cheat you?" "Constantly. I learned to cheat back." This time he did smile. "Good. You'll need that." The next morning, they rode into Cedar Bend for supplies. Turner needed to file some paperwork at the courthouse, and Josephine wanted to visit Mrs. Fletcher. The town looked the same, dusty, small, unwelcoming. But Josephine felt different. She sat straighter in the wagon, her hands no longer smooth and pale, but work-roughened and tanned. She wore her work dress and boots, her hair in a practical braid. She looked like what she was, a rancher's wife. Mrs. Fletcher nearly cried when she saw her. "Look at you, you've got color in your cheeks." "That's sunburn," Josephine said, but she hugged the older woman tightly. "How are you?" "Same as always. More importantly, how are you? Is he treating you well?" "He treats me like a partner, just as he promised." Mrs. Fletcher studied her face. "You're happy." "I'm satisfied." Josephine chose the word carefully. "It's hard work, harder than anything I've done, but it's honest. And I'm building something real. That's more than most can say." Mrs. Fletcher poured tea. "You've caused quite a stir, you know. Catherine Brennan's been telling anyone who'll listen that you'll be back in town within a month, begging for charity." "Catherine Brennan can believe whatever helps her sleep at night. That's my girl." Mrs. Fletcher grinned. "There's also been talk about you and Caleb, people wondering how legitimate the marriage is." Josephine felt heat rise in her cheeks. People can wonder all they want. The marriage is legal. I know that, but you know how folks are. They gossip. Mrs. Fletcher's expression turned serious. Just be careful. The Brennans and Wardlows have influence. If they decide to make trouble for you, let them try. But later, as Josephine left the boarding house, she nearly collided with Thomas Brennan himself. He was coming out of the courthouse, papers under his arm, and stopped dead when he saw her. Josephine. She'd thought about this moment, imagined what she'd say if she saw him again. Now that he stood before her, she felt nothing. No anger, no hurt. Just a mild distaste, like seeing something unpleasant she'd rather avoid. Thomas. He looked older than she remembered, or maybe she was just seeing him clearly for the first time. I heard you married Turner. You heard correctly. That was fast. His tone held an edge. Almost like you had it planned. Josephine laughed, a short, sharp sound. Planned? You mean like how you planned to keep me dangling while you secured a better option? Now wait a minute. No. You don't get to judge my choices. You made yours very clear. She stepped around him. Excuse me. He can't give you what I could have, Thomas called after her. That ranch is failing. Everyone knows it. You're going to end up with nothing. Josephine turned back. I'd rather have nothing with an honest man than everything with a liar. She walked away, her heart pounding, but her step steady. Turner was waiting by the wagon, and from his expression, he'd seen the whole exchange. You all right? He asked. I'm fine. Better than fine. And she was. Facing Thomas had been like lancing an old wound, painful for a moment, then suddenly, blessedly, clean. They drove back to the ranch in comfortable silence. The sun was high, and the land stretched out around them, harsh and beautiful in theirs. That night, a storm rolled in. Josephine woke to the sound of rain hammering on the roof and wind shrieking around the house corners. She got out of bed, pulling a shawl around her shoulders, and found Turner already up, staring out the window. Bad one, he said. We need to check the barn. Animals get spooked in weather like this. They ran through the rain, Josephine's nightgown soaking through immediately, despite the shawl. In the barn, the horses were restless, tossing their heads and stamping. The sick cow, mostly recovered now, stood at the back of her stall, eyes rolling white. Easy, easy, Turner murmured, moving among them with calm confidence. Just a storm. You've been through worse. Josephine helped where she could, speaking softly to the animals, her presence soothing even if her words were meaningless. Gradually, the horses settled. The cow stopped her nervous shifting. Then lightning struck somewhere close, the crack so loud it seemed to split the air itself. One of the horses, a young gelding, panicked, rearing in his stall. His hooves caught the door, splintering wood. Watch out! Turner lunged for the horse's halter, but the animal was beyond reason. He reared again, and his shoulder caught Turner hard, slamming him into the stall wall. Turner went down with a grunt of pain. Caleb! Josephine didn't think. She grabbed a bucket and threw the water at the horse, shocking him into stillness. Then she was at Turner's side, helping him sit up. Are you hurt? Ribs. He pressed a hand to his left side, his face gone gray. Might have cracked one. Can you stand? Give me a minute. But when he tried to rise, he swayed dangerously. Josephine got her shoulder under his arm, taking as much of his weight as she could manage. Lean on me. We're going back to the house. The horses are fine. You're not. Come on. Getting him back through the rain and into the house took all her strength. Turner was a big man, and every step clearly cost him. By the time they reached his bedroom, both of them were soaking wet and shaking. I need to check the damage, Josephine said, helping him sit on the bed. Can you take off your shirt? He managed it, moving with careful slowness. In the lamplight, she could already see the bruise forming along his left side, an ugly purple-black spreading across his ribs. Can you breathe? Hurts, but I can manage. Josephine pressed gently along the ribs, and Turner hissed when she hit a particular spot. That one's probably broken. Maybe the one below it, too. You know medicine? My mother broke her ribs falling on ice. I remember what the doctor did. She went to the kitchen and came back with strips of cloth. I need to wrap you. It'll hurt. Can't hurt worse than it does now. But it did. Turner's face went white as she wound the cloth tight around his chest, binding the broken ribs. He didn't make a sound, but she could feel him trembling. Done, she said finally, tying off the bandage. You need to rest. No work tomorrow. Can't. Cattle need. I'll handle it. Josephine's tone left no room for argument. You're hurt. If you push it, you'll make it worse and be useless for weeks. Give yourself a few days to heal, and you'll be back to full strength sooner. Turner looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. All right. Good. She helped him lie down, propping pillows behind him so he wasn't flat. I'll check on you in a few hours. Josephine? She paused at the door. Yes? Thank you. That's what partners do. The storm raged all night. Josephine checked the barn twice more, making sure the animals stayed calm. She checked on Turner every few hours, bringing him water, adjusting his pillows, making sure the bandage stayed secure. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and bright. Turner was sleeping, his breathing even despite the pain he must be in. Josephine did the morning chores alone, then made a simple breakfast of eggs and toast. When Turner woke, she brought food to his room. He tried to sit up and winced. Slow, she said, helping him. Here, eat. He ate in silence, then looked at her. You handled that well last night. I was terrified. Didn't show it. He set aside the empty plate. You could have panicked. Most people would have. Most people aren't partners in a ranch. Besides, if you died, I'd be stuck running this place alone. Purely selfish motivation. His mouth quirked. Selfish, sure. Over the next 3 days, Josephine ran the ranch alone. She checked the cattle, fed the animals, collected eggs, and managed to cook meals that were actually edible. It was exhausting. She fell into bed each night too tired to think. But she did it. Every task Turner had taught her, she completed. And when he finally felt well enough to venture outside, leaning heavily on a walking stick, she showed him that nothing had been neglected. You're tougher than you look, he said, surveying the property. So are you. Most men would still be in bed. Can't afford to be. We've got too much work. We'll take it slow. I can handle the heavy lifting for now. Turner looked at her, and for the first time she saw real respect in his eyes. Not just acknowledgement of her usefulness, but genuine respect. You really are a partner. That's what you hired me for, isn't it? Hired. Yeah. But his tone was thoughtful, like he was reconsidering that word. They worked together through the rest of the afternoon, Turner giving instructions while Josephine did the physical labor. It was a different kind of partnership than before, more balanced, more trusting. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Turner spoke without looking at her. When I made that offer in town, I thought I was just solving a problem, getting help for the ranch. And now? Now I think maybe I got the better end of the deal. Josephine felt warmth spread through her chest, not the heat of attraction, but something deeper. The warmth of being valued, of belonging. We both got what we needed, she said quietly. Maybe so. The fire crackled. Outside, coyotes yipped in the distance. And in the small house on the Texas frontier, two people who'd started as strangers sat together in comfortable silence, building something that might, someday, become more than either of them had bargained for. 2 weeks after the storm, Turner was moving almost normally again, though Josephine noticed he still favored his left side when he thought she wasn't watching. They were checking fence line near the creek when they spotted riders approaching from the east. 3 men on horseback, moving with the kind of deliberate purpose that made Turner's shoulders tense. Stay close, he said quietly, his hand moving to rest on the rifle scabbard attached to his saddle. As the riders drew near, Josephine recognized the man in front. Thomas Brennan sat his horse with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to be anywhere. Behind him rode 2 ranch hands she didn't recognize, both armed. Turner? Thomas called out, pulling up about 20 feet away. We need to talk. So talk. Turner's voice was flat, giving nothing away. Found 5 of your cattle on my land this morning, eating my grass, drinking from my creek. Thomas's tone was pleasant, but his eyes were hard. That's the 3rd time in 2 months. Fence break? That's what you said last time, and the time before. Thomas shifted in his saddle. Starting to think you're not maintaining your boundaries proper. We've been mending fence every week. Turner's jaw was tight. If cattle got through, there's a reason. The reason is you can't manage your property. Thomas smiled, and it was the smile Josephine remembered from his letters, charming and empty. I'm willing to keep the 5 head as compensation for damages. Call it settled. Those cattle are worth $40 each, Josephine said before she could stop herself. That's $200 for grass they ate for maybe a day. Thomas's gaze shifted to her and his smile widened. Josephine, didn't see you there. How's married life treating you? Better than you'd hoped, I imagine. One of the ranch hands snickered. Thomas's smile froze. This is ranch business. Maybe you should let the men handle it. She's my partner, Turner said, his voice gone colder. She handles ranch business, same as me. Now, about those cattle. I'll come collect them today. No charge for the grass. I don't think so. Like I said, compensation's fair. Thomas leaned forward slightly. Unless you want to take it up with the county sheriff. But we both know Wardlow's got the sheriff's ear, and I've got witnesses who'll say your fence has been a problem for months. Your witnesses work for you. Still counts. Thomas straightened. Tell you what, though, since we used to be acquainted, I'll be generous. You can have 3 back, 2 stays as payment. That's still $80 for nothing, Josephine said. That's me being neighborly. Could keep all 5 and make a case for more. Thomas's pleasant tone never wavered. Your call, Turner. 3 cattle, or we see how it plays in court. Turner was silent for a long moment. Josephine could see the calculation behind his eyes. The cost of fighting versus the cost of giving in. Finally, he nodded once. I'll collect the 3 this afternoon. Good. Knew you'd see a reason. Thomas turned his horse. Oh, and Turner, might want to check that northeast section of fence. Looked pretty weak when I rode past yesterday. Hate to see more cattle wander off. They rode away, and Josephine turned to Turner. He's lying. He probably cut the fence himself. Probably. Turner's voice was tight with anger. But I can't prove it. And he's right about Wardlow having influence. Sheriff's not going to take my word over theirs. So he just gets away with stealing from us? Welcome to ranching. Turner clicked his tongue, and his horse started walking. Come on, let's see what shape that northeast fence is in. The fence was exactly as Turner had suspected. 3 posts knocked over, wire cut clean with tools. Fresh cuts, probably made sometime in the last few days. Bastard, Turner said softly, examining the damage. He did this on purpose. Drove my cattle through, then came with his high horse speech about proper maintenance. Why? Josephine dismounted, studying the cut wire. Why go through all this trouble? 2 cows isn't that much money to a man like Brennan. It's not about the money. It's about making me look bad. Making me look like I can't manage my own property. Turner pulled off his hat, running a hand through his hair. Wardlow's been trying to buy my land for 2 years. Says it's got the best water access in the county. I won't sell, so he's trying to make owning it so difficult I'll give up. And Thomas is helping because he married Wardlow's daughter. What the father-in-law wants, Thomas makes happen. Turner replaced his hat, his expression grim. They've been at this since before you arrived. Small things at first, dealing through me with buyers, spreading talk that my cattle were diseased. But it's getting worse. Josephine looked at the cut fence, then at the land beyond. Rolling hills, good grass, the creek running silver in the sunlight. She thought about the account books, the poor prices, the mounting pressure. They're trying to force you out. Yes. And if you go, they buy the land cheap at auction when the bank forecloses. Turner glanced at her, something like surprise in his eyes. You figured that out quick. It's not complicated. It's just mean. Josephine crouched, examining one of the fence posts. But they made a mistake. What mistake? They assumed you were alone, that you'd keep taking it until you broke. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. But you're not alone anymore. And I didn't come all this way just to get pushed around by Thomas Brennan twice. Josephine. We fixed the fence. We document everything, when it was cut, how it was cut. We write to the Stockmen's Association and report the harassment. And we stop selling through Brennan's buyers. We go to Fort Worth like we planned and find honest dealers. That's all good in theory, but nothing. You've been playing defense because you were by yourself and couldn't afford to pick a fight. Now there's 2 of us. We pick the fight. She met his eyes steadily. They want to make owning this land difficult? Fine. We make stealing from us impossible. Turner was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Then, slowly, he smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes. You're serious? Completely. All right then. He pulled wire cutters from his saddlebag. Let's fix this fence. Tomorrow we start documenting everything. And next week we take that cattle drive to Fort Worth ourselves. They worked through the afternoon, replacing posts and restringing wire. When they finished, Turner marked the location on a hand-drawn map he kept of the property, noting the date and type of damage. Been doing this for 6 months, he said, showing her the map. Every fence break, every problem, all marked. Haven't reported it yet because I wanted enough evidence to make it stick. Josephine studied the map. There were dozens of marks, all concentrated along the boundaries nearest to Brennan and Wardlow land. This is more than enough. Why haven't you filed a complaint? Because the county sheriff is Warren Cole, who happens to be Wardlow's cousin. Turner rolled up the map. Any complaint I file goes straight to Wardlow's ears, and suddenly things get worse instead of better. So we go over his head, right to the territorial marshal. They handle disputes that cross county lines, don't they? They do, but that's a long process. Months, maybe years. And in the meantime, I still have to live next to these people. We, Josephine corrected, we have to live next to them. And they're going to keep pushing until we push back or break. I'd rather push. Turner looked at her for a long moment. You know they'll come after you too, Catherine especially. She's got a sharp tongue and friends who'll spread whatever story she wants. Let her try. I'm not the girl who got off that stage anymore. I'm a ranch owner who knows how to work. Josephine gathered the tools they'd used. Besides, what's she going to say? That I married you for money? Everyone already assumes that? That I'm desperate? Don't care. I've got nothing to prove to Cedar Bend. No, Turner said quietly. I suppose you don't. That night, Josephine wrote 2 letters by lamplight while Turner cleaned his rifle at the table. The first was to the territorial marshal's office, detailing the harassment and including a copy of Turner's property map. The second was to the Fort Worth Stockmen's Association, requesting a list of reputable cattle buyers who dealt directly with ranchers. You have good handwriting, Turner observed, looking over her shoulder at the nearly completed letters. Factory supervisor taught me. Said if I wanted to move up from the floor, I needed to write clear enough that the office men could read my reports. Josephine signed her name with a flourish. I'll post these when we go to town. We should go day after tomorrow. Need supplies anyway, and I want to collect those 3 cattle from Brennan before he changes his mind. I'll make a list. They fell quiet. The only sounds the scratch of Josephine's pen and the soft rasp of cloth on metal as Turner cleaned his weapon. It was comfortable, this shared silence. They'd learned each other's rhythms over the past month, when to talk and when to simply exist in the same space. Can I ask you something? Turner said eventually. Of course. When you got off that stage and found out about Brennan, what did you think? Really think? Josephine set down her pen, considering the question. I thought I was going to die here. Not literally, but everything I'd worked for, everything I'd planned, it all just dissolved, and I couldn't see a way forward. She looked at him directly. Then you made your offer, and I thought you were either crazy or cruel. Maybe both. And now? Now I think you offered me exactly what I needed, even if it wasn't what I thought I wanted. She smiled slightly. Turns out, I'm better at building something real than chasing pretty promises. Yeah. Turner set aside the rifle, satisfied with its condition. You are. 2 days later, they rode into Cedar Bend with the wagon. Turner needed to collect the cattle from Brennan's property, which bordered the town's eastern edge, while Josephine handled the supply shopping and posted her letters. Morrison's general store was busy when she entered. Several women clustered near the fabric section. Josephine recognized Catherine Brennan immediately. That perfect posture, the expensive dress, the way she stood like she owned the space. Well, Catherine said loudly enough for everyone to hear, look who's come down from the hills. I barely recognized you, Josephine. All that sun has done terrible things to your complexion. The other women tittered. Josephine ignored them, walking to the counter where Mr. Morrison stood looking uncomfortable. I need supplies, she said, handing him the list. And put it on the Turner account. Of course, Mrs. Turner. I'll gather these for you. Mrs. Turner, Catherine repeated, moving closer. That still sounds so strange. How long have you been married now? A month? 6 weeks? 5 weeks, Josephine said evenly. So fast. Most couples court for at least a year. Get to know each other properly. Catherine's smile was poison sweet. But I suppose when you're desperate, you can't afford to be particular. Catherine, one of her companions murmured, a warning. But Catherine was just getting started. Thomas mentioned he saw you both checking fence line. Said you were doing manual labor right alongside Caleb. How rustic. Of course, when you can't afford hired hands, I suppose everyone has to pitch in. Josephine turned to face her fully. Is there something you actually want to say to me, or are you just making noise? Catherine's eyes flashed. I'm saying it's obvious why Caleb married you. He needed free labor and was willing to offer marriage to get it. That's not exactly romantic, is it? No, it's not romantic. It's practical. Something you might understand if you'd ever worked a day in your life instead of just spending someone else's money. The store went silent. Even Morrison paused in gathering supplies. Catherine's face flushed red. How dare you? I dare because it's true. Josephine stepped closer, her voice dropping but losing none of its edge. You married Thomas because your father told you to, because it benefited his business interests. At least I married someone honest about what he wanted. Can you say the same? You know nothing about my marriage. I know Thomas wrote me love letters while he was courting you. I know he kept me dangling until your father approved the partnership. I know he's a liar. Josephine smiled without warmth. So maybe focus on your own questionable choices before judging mine. She turned back to Morrison. How long for those supplies? 10 minutes, Mrs. Turner. Morrison was trying not to smile. I'll wait outside. Josephine walked out, her heart pounding, but her head high. Behind her, she heard the explosion of whispers, Catherine's voice rising above them in indignant protest. Turner was waiting by the wagon, and one look at her face told him something had happened. Trouble? Catherine Brennan has a big mouth and a small brain. Nothing I couldn't handle. Josephine climbed up onto the wagon seat. Did you get the cattle? Yep. 3 head, all healthy despite their adventure onto Brennan land. Turner swung up beside her. Brennan wasn't there, which was probably for the best. His ranch foreman handed them over without argument. Good. Let's get out of here before… Josephine! Catherine's voice rang out across the street. She stood on the boardwalk outside Morrison's, her face still flushed. Running away? How typical. Turner's hand moved to the reins, but Josephine touched his arm. Let me handle this. She climbed down and walked back to where Catherine stood. Up close, she could see that Catherine's eyes were bright with angry tears. You think you're better than me, Catherine said, her voice shaking. Coming here with your city airs, your educated talk, but you're just a factory girl who got lucky. I never said I was better than you. You're the one who keeps comparing us. Josephine's voice was quieter now, tired. I don't want to fight with you, Catherine. I just want to build a life and be left alone. You took what should have been mine. I took nothing. Caleb Turner never wanted you. That's not my fault. Josephine saw the flinch and felt a small stab of guilt, but the truth needed saying. You're angry at me because it's easier than being angry at your father for forcing you into a marriage you didn't want, or at Thomas for being exactly who he is. Catherine's mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, she looked very young and very lost. I'm sorry you're unhappy, Josephine said, and meant it. But making me miserable won't make you happy. It'll just make both of us miserable. She walked back to the wagon, leaving Catherine standing alone on the boardwalk. Turner didn't say anything, just clicked his tongue and started the horses moving. They were almost out of town when Josephine spoke. That was probably a mistake. What was? Feeling sorry for her. She'll just use it as ammunition, maybe. But that doesn't make it wrong to feel it. Turner glanced at her. You've got a kind heart under all that practical sense. Nothing wrong with that. Kind hearts don't survive long out here. Neither do cruel ones. Need balance. He smiled slightly. You'll figure it out. The next week was consumed with preparations for the Fort Worth trip. They selected 20 head of prime cattle to drive. The best they had, young steers that would fetch good prices. Turner wanted to bring more, but driving cattle required constant attention, and with just the 2 of them, 20 was the safe limit. We'll move slow, he explained, studying the route map. 10 miles a day, maybe 12 if the weather holds. 3 days to Fort Worth, 2 or 3 days to conduct business, 3 days back. Week and a half, total. What about the rest of the herd while we're gone? They'll be all right on the range. We'll check all the fence before we leave, make sure everything's secure. Bring the horses into the barn, secure the house. It'll have to be enough. The night before they left, Josephine couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind outside and thinking about everything that could go wrong. Cattle could scatter. Someone could steal from the ranch while they were gone. The buyers in Fort Worth might not be interested. A soft knock on her door made her sit up. Yes? You awake? Turner's voice, quiet. Yes. Can I come in? She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. All right. He opened the door, lamp in hand. In the flickering light, his face looked worried. Can't sleep? Too much thinking. Same. He sat on the edge of her bed, the lamp between them. Been doing this route for years, but never with cattle that mattered this much. If we don't get good prices, we will. You sound certain. I am. We've got good stock. We're going straight to buyers instead of through middlemen, and we'll negotiate properly instead of taking the first offer. Josephine pulled the shawl tighter. We're doing everything right. The rest is just luck. Not much for luck. Then call it odds. We're stacking them in our favor. Turner smiled slightly. When did you get so tough? When I had to be. She paused. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you really propose to me? Not the practical reasons. The real reason. He was quiet for a long moment, the lamp flame dancing in his eyes. Because you looked like you'd fight. When I saw you at the boarding house, you could have been crying or begging or broken, but you were just planning, figuring out your next move, and I thought, that's someone who won't quit when things get hard. You needed someone who wouldn't quit. I needed a partner who'd see it through, not just the good days. He met her eyes. Was I wrong? No. Josephine felt something warm unfold in her chest. You weren't wrong. They sat in comfortable silence until the lamp began to gutter. Then Turner stood, stretching his still tender ribs carefully. Get some sleep. Long day tomorrow. You too. He paused at the door. Josephine? Thank you. For what? For seeing it through. After he left, Josephine lay back down, but sleep still wouldn't come. Her mind kept circling back to the look in his eyes when he thanked her. Not just gratitude, but something deeper. Respect. Trust. Maybe even the beginnings of something more. She told herself it didn't matter. This was a business arrangement, practical and clear. Feelings would only complicate things. But somewhere in the darkness, she admitted the truth. Feelings were already there, growing quiet and steady like grass after rain. The question was what to do about them. Dawn came cold and gray. They set out with the 20 steers, driving them slowly northeast toward Fort Worth. The cattle were manageable at first, used to being moved around the property. But by afternoon, when they were in unfamiliar territory, the animals got nervous. Keep them bunched, Turner called, circling around the left flank on his horse. Don't let any break off. Josephine rode Dove on the right, watching for strays. It was exhausting work, constantly moving, constantly alert. By the time they stopped to make camp that evening, every muscle in her body ached. Turner built a small fire while Josephine hobbled the horses. They ate cold beans and bread, too tired for conversation. Above them, stars emerged in impossible numbers, more than Josephine had ever seen in Philadelphia. Beautiful, isn't it? Turner said, following her gaze. Yes. Makes me feel small. That's not a bad thing sometimes. Helps keep perspective. He threw another stick on the fire. You did good today. Most people can't handle a first cattle drive. Most people don't have a choice. True enough, he smiled. But you're not most people. That night they slept on opposite sides of the fire, bedrolls spread on hard ground. Josephine woke several times, checking on the cattle, making sure none had worked loose from the makeshift rope corral they'd set up. Each time she saw Turner doing the same from his side. Partners. That's what they were. Partners looking out for each other and their shared investment. The second day was harder. One of the steers developed a limp, slowing the whole herd. Then, around midday, they encountered another group of drovers moving sheep northward. Damn, Turner muttered. Sheep spook cattle. We need to keep distance. But the road was narrow here, bordered by rocky hills. The sheep drover, a grizzled man with a tobacco-stained beard, showed no interest in yielding right of way. You'll have to wait, he called. Sheep don't move fast. Neither do cattle when they're panicked by sheep, Turner called back. Give us room to pass. Road's free to all. I was here first. Turner's jaw tightened. Josephine could see him calculating. If they waited, they'd lose hours. If they pushed through and the cattle scattered, they could lose animals. I'll talk to him, she said. Josephine. But she was already riding forward, urging Dove toward the sheep drover. Up close, the man looked even rougher, his clothes stained and patched, his eyes suspicious. Sir, Josephine said, keeping her voice pleasant, we're taking these cattle to market. If they get spooked by your sheep and scatter, we could lose days gathering them. I'm sure you understand how that would hurt our business. Not my problem, lady. No, but it could be. See, if our cattle scatter into those hills, they'll probably take some of your sheep with them. Sheep aren't bright that way. They follow anything that moves fast. She smiled. Then both of us lose time and money. Seems foolish when you could just move your flock to the side for 10 minutes and let us pass. The drover studied her, then spat a stream of tobacco juice. You threatening me? I'm pointing out mutual benefit. You let us pass quickly. Nobody loses anything. You make us wait. We both risk losses. Josephine kept her tone light, conversational. Your choice, of course, but seems to me one choice is smarter than the other. The drover was silent for a long moment. Then he grunted. 10 minutes, that's all you get. That's all we need. Thank you. She rode back to Turner, who was staring at her with something between admiration and disbelief. How did you... I worked a factory floor for 3 years. You learn to negotiate with stubborn men. She positioned herself at the front of the herd. Let's move before he changes his mind. They drove the cattle past the sheep in tense silence, every moment expecting panic, but the animals stayed calm, moving steadily along the road. When they were clear, Turner let out a breath. That was well done. That was lucky. He could have just as easily told me to go to hell, but he didn't. Turner smiled. Because you gave him a reason to cooperate instead of just demanding. Smart. That night, camped under stars again, Turner was quieter than usual. Josephine noticed him watching her across the fire, his expression thoughtful. What? She finally asked. Nothing. Just thinking. About? About how I proposed to you because I needed help running a ranch, and you've turned out to be more than I expected. Josephine felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. I'm just doing what needs doing. No, you're doing more than that. You're building something with me. He paused. I want you to know this partnership, it's more than I hoped for. We're not even 2 months in. Don't celebrate yet. I'm not celebrating. I'm just acknowledging. His gaze held hers across the flames. This thing between us, it's changing. You feel it? Josephine's breath caught. Yes, good. Because I want you to know, whatever this becomes, I'll honor our agreement. You want to leave after a year, I'll pay passage like I promised. But I'm hoping you won't want to. Caleb, don't answer now. Just think about it. He lay back on his bedroll, ending the conversation before it could go further. Josephine stared him the fire long after he'd fallen asleep. Whatever this becomes, the words echoed in her mind, tangling with the feelings she'd been trying to ignore. This was supposed to be simple, a business arrangement. But somewhere between the hard work and shared silences, between injuries tended and storms weathered, it had stopped being simple at all. The third day brought them into Fort Worth just after noon, dusty and exhausted, but with all 20 head accounted for. The city sprawled before them, bigger than Cedar Bend by magnitudes, buildings rising 3 and 4 stories high, streets crowded with wagons and people and noise. Josephine had thought Philadelphia was overwhelming, but Fort Worth had a different energy, raw and pushing, like everything was being built and torn down simultaneously. Stockyards are north of town, Turner said, guiding the cattle through the crowded streets. People stopped to stare at them. A man and woman driving cattle alone, both looking like they'd been dragged through dust for days. We'll pen them there, then find a hotel. The stockyards were massive, maze of pens and chutes stretching across acres. The smell hit Josephine first, thousands of animals confined in close quarters, manure and hay and fear. Men shouted, cattle bawled. Somewhere a horse screamed in panic or pain. A yard worker directed them to an empty pen. $2 for the week. We won't need a week, Turner said, counting out coins. 3 days? Maybe 4? Still $2. That's minimum. The worker pocketed the money. You selling? Looking for buyers, good ones. A lot of buyers come through. Ask at the exchange office. They'll tell you who's worth talking to. The worker spat tobacco juice near Josephine's boot, not quite hitting it, but close enough to be insulting. Though most buyers don't deal with small operations. We'll manage, Josephine said coolly. They settled the cattle and found a hotel 3 blocks from the stockyards, a narrow building with peeling paint and a sign that read Drover's Rest. The lobby smelled like old coffee and older sweat, but the clerk was businesslike and didn't ask questions when Turner requested 2 rooms. Second floor, end of the hall, the clerk said, handing over keys. Bathhouse is out back, 50 cents for hot water. Josephine had never wanted anything more than she wanted that hot water. 3 days of sleeping on the ground, riding through dust and breathing cattle. She felt like the dirt had worked its way into her bones. I'll go first, she said. Unless you... Go ahead. I need to check the exchange office before it closes anyway. Turner was already turning toward the door. Meet you back here in an hour. The bathhouse was a rough wooden structure with individual stalls, each containing a zinc tub and a stool. The water was barely warm despite the promised hot, but Josephine didn't care. She scrubbed away 3 days of grime, watching the water turn gray and then brown. By the time she emerged, her skin was pink and raw, but she felt almost human again. Turner was waiting in the lobby, papers in hand and a cautiously optimistic expression on his face. Found 3 buyers worth talking to, all reputable, all paying fair prices according to the exchange. When can we meet them? Tomorrow morning. I set up appointments. He looked at her, really looked, and something shifted in his expression. He looked different. Clean, you mean? That too. But his gaze held hers longer than necessary before he cleared his throat and headed for the stairs. I'll wash up, then we should eat. There's a restaurant 2 streets over that won't poison us. The restaurant was called the Cattleman's Table, and it was packed with drovers and buyers and men whose business Josephine couldn't guess at. They found a corner table and Turner ordered for both of them. Steak, potatoes, beans, coffee, so strong it could strip paint. This is good, Josephine said after the first bite. Real beef, seasoned properly, cooked to tenderness. After days of cold beans and hard bread, it tasted like luxury. Worth the trip just for this. Turner cut into his steak with single-minded focus. Used to come here every time I drove cattle, before I had the ranch, when I was working other people's herds. Thought someday I'd be bringing my own cattle, eating at this table as a real rancher. You are a real rancher. Am now. Wasn't sure I'd make it this far. He glanced around the room. Half these men won't last 5 years. Ranching breaks most people who try it. Why do they try then? Same reason you came to Texas on a promise from a stranger, because the alternative seemed worse. Josephine thought about the factory floor, the cramped apartment, her father's disappointment. Yes, I suppose so. They ate in comfortable silence until a man approached their table. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never doubting his welcome anywhere. Caleb Turner, the man said, extending his hand. Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd gone under after last year. Turner shook his hand, though his expression had gone carefully neutral. Still standing, Dixon. This is my wife, Josephine. Dixon's eyebrows rose as he looked at Josephine. Wife? Well, congratulations. Didn't know you were the marrying kind. His tone suggested he found the whole thing amusing. I'm Marcus Dixon. I buy cattle for the northern markets. One of the buyers we're meeting tomorrow, Turner said to Josephine. That's right. Looking forward to seeing what you've brought. Though, I'll be honest, Dixon leaned against their table, proprietary. Word is your herd's been struggling. Lost stock over the winter. Problems with disease. That true? Where'd you hear that? Around, you know how talk spreads. Dixon smiled. I'm not saying I won't buy from you, just saying I'll need to inspect carefully. Make sure I'm getting quality. The cattle are quality. You'll see tomorrow. I'm sure they are. Dixon straightened. Enjoy your dinner. I'll see you at the yards, 9 o'clock. He walked away, and Josephine saw Turner's jaw working. What was that about? That was about Wardlow and Brennan spreading lies ahead of us, trying to tank our sale before we even start negotiating. Turner pushed his plate away, appetite gone. Damn it, I should have expected this. Can we prove the rumors are false? Tomorrow, when Dixon sees the cattle. But first impressions matter. If he comes in expecting problems, he'll find them, even if they're not there. Josephine's mind raced. What if we don't wait until tomorrow? What if we show him tonight? The yards are closed. So? We have access to our pen. We bring Dixon by tonight, show him the cattle are healthy, let him see we're not trying to hide anything. She leaned forward. Catch him off guard. Make him see the truth before his prejudice has time to set. Turner considered this. It's risky. Might make us look desperate. We are desperate, but more importantly, we're right. Those cattle are good stock, and anyone with eyes can see it. Josephine stood. Come on, let's go find Dixon before he's too drunk to see straight. They found him at the saloon attached to the hotel, playing cards with 3 other men. Turner approached with visible reluctance, but Dixon waved them over, jovial now, with whiskey in him. Turner, changed your mind about the sale already? No. But my wife made a good point. If you're concerned about quality, why wait until morning? Come see the cattle now. I've got nothing to hide. Dixon's smile faded slightly. He exchanged glances with the other card players. Other buyers, Josephine realized. One of them shrugged. All right, Dixon said, setting down his cards. Let's see these miracle cattle worth driving all the way to Fort Worth. The 5 of them walked to the stockyards through the cooling evening air. The yards were quieter now, most of the day workers gone home, just a few night guards keeping watch. Turner led them to the pen holding their 20 head. Under the lamplight, the cattle looked good. Their coats were shiny despite the journey, their eyes bright, their movements strong. Dixon leaned on the fence rail, studying them with a practiced eye. Well, he said, after a long moment, they're not sick, I'll give you that. They're prime stock, Josephine said. Young, healthy, well-fed. You won't find better in these yards. One of the other buyers, a shorter man with spectacles, moved closer. She's right. These are good animals. What are you asking, Turner? $42 a head. Dixon whistled. That's high. That's fair. You know it is. The buyers conferred quietly among themselves. Josephine watched their faces, trying to read the negotiation happening in glances and subtle nods. Finally, Dixon turned back. I'll give you 38. That's my top offer. 40, Turner countered, and not a dollar less. 39. Final. Turner hesitated, and Josephine could see him calculating. 39 was still better than what they'd get from Brennan's buyers. $780 total, enough to pay down debt and buy supplies for the next season. 40, Josephine said before Turner could answer. These cattle are worth it, and you know it. You're just used to getting bargains from desperate ranchers. We're not desperate, we're professional. Dixon looked at her, really looked, and she saw the exact moment he decided she wasn't bluffing. All right, 40, but I want first pick of the lot. I choose which ones I take. Agreed. How many? All 20, if they pass inspection in daylight. Dixon extended his hand to Turner. We'll draw up papers tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, exchange office. After they left, Turner turned to Josephine. You just negotiated our first real sale. We negotiated it. No, you held firm when I was ready to fold. Got us another $1 ahead. That's $20 more in our pocket. He laughed, sudden and surprised. You're better at this than I am. I'm just not afraid to walk away. Worst case, we talk to the other buyers. Except there might not have been other buyers willing to pay 40. Then Dixon wouldn't have agreed. Josephine started walking back toward the hotel. He showed his hand when he countered at 39 instead of walking away. That meant he wanted the cattle and was willing to pay close to our price. After that, it was just a matter of not blinking first. Turner caught up to her. Where'd you learn that? Factory negotiations. The floor supervisors would try to cut our pay or extend hours. We'd threaten to strike. Usually, they'd meet us halfway because shutting down production cost them more than giving us what we wanted. She smiled slightly. Same principle, just different numbers. Back at the hotel, they stood in the hallway between their rooms. The lamp at the end of the hall flickered, throwing uncertain shadows. Thank you, Turner said quietly. For tonight, for pushing when I was ready to take less. That's what partners do. Yeah, but... He trailed off, looking like he wanted to say something else. Finally, he just shook his head. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Josephine lay awake in her narrow hotel bed, listening to the sounds of Fort Worth through the thin walls. Men arguing in the room next door, someone playing piano badly in the saloon below. the constant rumble of wagon wheels on cobblestones. Her mind kept replaying the moment in the stockyards when she'd held firm on the price, the way Turner had looked at her afterward. Like she was more than a partner, like she was essential. The thought should scare her. Instead, it felt right. Morning came with pale light through grimy windows and the smell of coffee from somewhere downstairs. Josephine dressed carefully in her best remaining dress. The dark blue one she'd worn for the wedding, pressed as smooth as she could manage. If they were signing papers today, she wanted to look like someone worth taking seriously. Turner was already in the lobby, wearing a clean shirt she didn't recognize. He must have bought it yesterday while she was bathing. The thought made her smile. Him shopping for clothes, probably uncomfortable in a store, definitely overpaying. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." The exchange office was a narrow building squeezed between two larger structures, its interior dim and cramped. Papers covered every surface, and the man behind the desk looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Turner and Dixon," Turner said. "We have an appointment. Back room. They're waiting." Dixon was there with the bespectacled buyer from last night, and a third man introduced as the exchange's official witness. They spent an hour going through paperwork, bills of sale, transfer of ownership, bank drafts. Dixon's money would be held by the exchange until Turner confirmed receipt, a protection against fraud on both sides. "Sign here," the exchange agent said, pushing papers across the table. "And here. Initial here." Josephine read every word before signing. Turner noticed and waited patiently, not rushing her. When they finally finished, the agent stamped each document with a heavy brass seal. "Congratulations, you're $800 richer." The agent handed Turner a receipt. "Funds will be available tomorrow morning. $800. Dixon had gone up another $20 during negotiations, claiming the cattle were slightly better quality than he'd initially assessed. Josephine suspected he just respected them more after last night and was willing to pay for that respect. Outside, Turner looked at the receipt like he couldn't quite believe it. $800, that's more than I've made in 2 years. That's what happens when you don't let yourself get cheated. No, that's what happens when you have someone smart handling negotiations. He folded the receipt carefully. "We need to talk about your share." "My share?" "Equal partners, remember? That means you get half, $400. Josephine's breath caught. $400 was more money than she'd ever had at once in her entire life. "Caleb, I can't." "Yes, you can. We agreed. Equal partners." His expression was firm. "Besides, you earned it. Without you, we'd have gotten 38 at best, probably less. But the ranch needs a lot of things. But our agreement comes first. 400 for you, 400 for ranch operations. That's how it works." Josephine thought about arguing, but she could see he wouldn't budge. And truthfully, having money of her own, real money, not an allowance, made her feel something she hadn't felt since leaving Philadelphia. Secure, independent. "All right," she said. "Thank you." They spent the rest of the day buying supplies, bulk flour and sugar, coffee, salt, tools. Turner had been making do without. Fabric for new clothes and curtains, seeds for a kitchen garden, a decent mattress to replace the lumpy disaster in Josephine's room. They spent carefully, making every dollar count, but for once not scraping by on the absolute minimum. That evening, they ate at the cattlemen's table again, celebrating with whiskey Turner ordered despite usually avoiding alcohol. "To partners," he said, raising his glass. "To not getting cheated," Josephine countered, and they drank. The whiskey burned going down, harsh and warming. Josephine felt it spread through her chest, loosening something that had been tightly wound since she'd stepped off that stagecoach 2 months ago. She was going to be all right, better than all right. She had money, work that mattered, and a partner who valued her. "Can I ask you something?" Turner said after his second drink, his usual reserve softened by alcohol. "Of course. Do you ever regret it? Agreeing to marry me instead of going home?" Josephine considered the question seriously. Did she regret it? The backbreaking work, the isolation, the uncertainty? "No. I thought I would, but I don't. Even though it's not what you planned. Especially because it's not what I planned. What I planned was a fantasy, a husband who'd take care of me, a comfortable life where I didn't have to work so hard." She smiled. "This is better. Harder, but better. Because it's real." "Real," Turner repeated, like he was testing the word. Yeah, it is that. Can I ask you something now? Fair's fair. Why did you never marry before? Before me, I mean. You're what, 35? You must have had opportunities. Turner was quiet for a moment, turning his glass in circles on the table. I was engaged once, 8 years ago. Girl named Martha from Cedar Bend. We planned to marry after I bought the ranch land. What happened? I told her it would take a year to build the house, get the first herd established. She said that was fine, she'd wait. But when the year came and I still didn't have much, just a rough cabin and 40 head of cattle, she married a shopkeeper instead. Said she couldn't live that rough, couldn't wait anymore for me to be successful. He drained his glass. Can't blame her. She wanted security and I couldn't provide it. I'm sorry. Don't be. She made the right choice for her. Married that shopkeeper, has 3 kids now, lives comfortable in town. She's happy. Are you? Turner looked at her directly. Getting there. For the first time in years, I think maybe I am. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Neither of them was quite drunk enough to name. Finally, Josephine broke the silence. We should head back. Long day tomorrow. They walked through Fort Worth's evening streets, past saloons spilling light and music, past the stockyards where cattle lowed in the darkness, past all the noise and bustle back to their quiet hotel. At their doors they paused. Josephine, Turner said, and then stopped, like he'd lost the words. Yes? Nothing. Just thank you for this, for everything. You keep thanking me. You know I'm getting something out of this arrangement too. Yeah, but still. Want you to know it matters. You matter. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with his own honesty. Anyway, good night. Good night, Caleb. In her room, Josephine lay awake again, but this time her sleeplessness wasn't from worry. It was anticipation. They were going home tomorrow with money in their pockets and supplies in the wagon. They'd proven they could make the ranch work. More than that, they'd proven they could work together. And somewhere in all of that, something had shifted between them. The partnership was becoming something else. Something neither of them had planned, but both seemed to want. The question was what to do about it. They left Fort Worth at dawn, the wagon heavy with supplies and their pockets holding bank drafts that represented security. The return journey was easier despite the loaded wagon. No cattle to manage, no constant watching, just steady miles on a familiar road. On the second night, camped under stars, Turner built the fire while Josephine made coffee. They'd fallen into this rhythm so naturally it felt like they'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. Been thinking, Turner said, accepting the coffee she handed him, about expanding the herd. With the money from the sale, we could buy another 50 head, build up faster. Or we could pay down the land loan, reduce the interest we're carrying. Could do that too. He sipped his coffee. What do you think we should do? Josephine noticed the we, not I think we should, or I've decided. He was actually asking her opinion, treating her like an equal partner in truth, not just on paper. Split it, she said. 200 to the loan, 200 to expansion, reduces our debt and grows our assets. Smart. That's what we'll do. Turner poked at the fire. Also been thinking about the house. Needs work, new roof, better windows, proper kitchen. If we're going to live there, might as well make it comfortable. We could do some of it ourselves, save on labor. You know carpentry? I know how to follow instructions and hammer nails. How hard can it be? Turner laughed. Harder than you think. But we'll figure it out. His expression turned serious. Josephine, about what I said the other night, about things changing between us. I meant it. Her heart kicked against her ribs. I know. And I need to know, is that something you want, or am I reading this wrong? Josephine set down her cup, giving herself time to think. This was the moment. She could keep things professional, maintain the boundaries they'd started with. It would be safer, simpler. But when had she ever chosen safe over real? You're not reading it wrong, she said quietly. I feel it too. I just don't know what to do about it. We could start by being honest. Stop pretending this is just business. And then what? We're already married. We're already partners. What changes? Everything. Nothing. Turner shook his head. I don't have the words for this. I'm not good at talking about feelings. Then don't talk. Show me. He stood and crossed to her side of the fire. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he cupped her face in his rough hands and kissed her. It wasn't like the kisses Josephine had read about in books. No fireworks, no world stopping. It was hesitant and a little awkward, both of them out of practice or maybe never in practice to begin with. But it was honest, real. And when they broke apart, she found herself smiling. That was terrible? Turner looked genuinely worried. Different, good different. She kissed him again, more confident this time. We'll get better at it. I hope so. That was embarrassing. Josephine laughed, and the sound felt like release. Everything about us has been awkward from the start. Why should this be any different? They sat together on her bedroll, his arm around her shoulders, her head against his chest. His heart beat steady beneath her ear, the same steady reliability he showed in everything. So what now? She asked. Now we go home. We work the ranch. We figure this out as we go. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Same as we've been doing, just with less pretending. I can do that. Good. Because I don't want you to leave after the year. I want you to stay. He paused. Not because of the ranch or the work. Because of this. Because He stopped, struggling. Because you matter. You matter too, Josephine said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. They held each other under the vast Texas sky. Two people who'd started as strangers and become something more through shared work and honest dealing. It wasn't the romance Josephine had once imagined, all sweet words and easy devotion. It was harder and more complicated and infinitely more real. And as she fell asleep in Turner's arms that night, she thought about how wrong her original plans had been. She'd come to Texas looking for security and marriage to a man who'd promised everything and delivered nothing. Instead, she'd found it in a partnership built on truth, in work that mattered, in a man who showed his care through actions rather than words. Morning came with Turner already awake, watching her sleep. Morning, he said when she stirred. How long have you been awake? Not long. Just thinking. About? About how lucky I got, making that proposal to a woman I'd never met. He smiled. Could have gone very wrong. It almost did. I thought you were insane. I was. Am. But sometimes insane works out. They continued home that day, and when the ranch came into view that evening, the weathered house, the barn, the corrals, Josephine felt something she'd never expected to feel again. She felt like she was coming home. The cattle were fine, grazing peacefully. The house was as they'd left it. Everything was exactly the same except for them. They'd left as partners joined by contract. They returned as something more, the beginning of what might become love, given time and care and continued honesty. That night, Turner asked if she wanted to move her things to his room. Not because you have to, because I'd like you to. Josephine thought about it for exactly 5 seconds. All right. They moved her belongings together, her few dresses, her mother's Bible, the supplies from Morrison's. It didn't take long. When they finished, Turner stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. I've never actually shared a room with someone. Not sure how this works. Neither have I. Josephine laughed at the absurdity of it. We'll figure it out. Same as everything else. And they did. Over the following weeks, they established new rhythms. They worked the ranch by day, repairing fence, checking cattle, building a proper chicken coop to replace the ramshackle one that kept losing birds to foxes. At night, they ate dinner together, planned the next day's work, and fell into bed exhausted but content. It wasn't always easy. Turner snored. Josephine was grumpy before coffee. They argued about money. He wanted to buy better equipment immediately. She wanted to save more first. They argued about expansion timing and whether to plant wheat versus corn and 100 other small decisions that ran a ranch required. But they always worked it out. And slowly, carefully, they built not just a working ranch but a working relationship. 2 months after Fort Worth, a letter arrived from the Territorial Marshal's office. They were investigating the harassment claims Turner had filed, interviewing neighbors, examining fence lines. Wardlow and Brennan would be questioned under oath. It's happening, Josephine said, reading the letter. They're actually taking it seriously, because we gave them evidence, and because we're not backing down. Turner looked satisfied. Wardlow's used to people being too scared to fight back. He doesn't know what to do with people who fight. A week later, Deputy Webb rode out to the ranch with news. The marshal had fined Wardlow and issued a formal warning to Brennan. Any further harassment would result in criminal charges. Wardlow's furious, Webb said, accepting the coffee Josephine offered. Tried to pull political strings, but the marshal doesn't answer to county powers. He told Wardlow if he didn't like territorial law, he could take it up with Washington. Turner grinned. Wish I could have seen that. It was something. Anyway, thought you should know, you've got protection now. Legally documented. They try anything else, we can actually do something about it. After Webb left, Turner pulled Josephine into a hug that lifted her off the ground. We did it. We actually did it. We're not done yet. We still need to prove the ranch can be profitable long term. With you running negotiations? We'll be fine. He set her down, his expression turning serious. You know what this means, right? We're not just surviving anymore. We're building something real, something that'll last. I know. Josephine smiled. That's exactly what I wanted, even if I didn't know it when I started. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over their land, their cattle grazing in the distance, their house solid behind them, their future stretching out uncertain, but possible. Turner took her hand, lacing their rough, work-worn fingers together. I love you, he said, simple and direct. Probably not supposed to say it yet, but there it is. Josephine's throat tightened. I love you too. Even though you snore and can't cook and think buying expensive tools before we can afford them is reasonable. And you're grumpy before coffee and stubborn about savings and always right about everything. Not everything. Close enough. He kissed her, and this time it wasn't awkward at all. They'd learned each other well enough now to know what worked. When they broke apart, Josephine rested her head on his shoulder. Think we'll make it? Long term? Yeah, I do. Turner's voice was certain. We're too stubborn to fail, both of us. And looking out at the ranch they were building together, at the life they were creating from scratch, through sheer determination and honest partnership, Josephine believed him. They would make it. Not because it was easy or because everything went according to plan, but because they'd learned to weather storms together, to fight for what mattered, and to build something real from a foundation of truth. The girl who'd stepped off that stagecoach desperate and betrayed was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her own strength, who'd earned her place through hard work, and who'd found love not in pretty promises but in shared struggle and mutual respect. It wasn't the story she'd expected. It was better. The seasons turned, and with them came the endless cycle of ranch work that marked time more reliably than any calendar. Spring brought calving season, and Josephine learned what it meant to go 3 nights without real sleep, checking on laboring cows every few hours, pulling calves when mothers struggled, bottle feeding the ones too weak to nurse. Her hands, already rough from fence work and daily chores, developed new calluses from the constant work. This one's not going to make it, Turner said one night in the barn, his voice heavy with exhaustion and resignation. He was crouched beside a newborn calf that lay too still, its breathing shallow and irregular. Josephine knelt beside him, stroking the calf's damp coat. How do you know? Born too early, lungs aren't developed right. You can hear it in the breathing, that rattle. He stood, wiping his hands on his pants. Sometimes you do everything right and it still doesn't work out. We could try a lot of things. Waste time and money keeping it alive another day, maybe 2. But it won't change the outcome. His expression was sad but certain. This is ranching. You save the ones you can and accept the ones you can't. The calf died just before dawn. Turner buried it behind the barn without ceremony, just practical necessity. Josephine watched from the porch, coffee cup warming her hands, and felt the weight of that small death more than she'd expected. They'd lost cattle before, to disease, predators, accidents. But this was different. This was potential that never got realized, a life that ended before it really began. You all right? Turner asked, coming up beside her. Yes. Just thinking about waste. All that effort for nothing. Not for nothing. The mother survived. She'll breed again next year. He took the coffee cup from her hands and drank from it, an intimacy that had become natural between them. Can't think of it as waste. Just part of the process. Some die so others can live. It wasn't comforting exactly, but it was true. By summer, the ranch was unrecognizable from the struggling operation Josephine had first seen 8 months ago. The house had a new roof that didn't leak, windows that actually closed properly, and curtains Josephine had sewn from fabric they'd bought in Fort Worth. She'd planted a kitchen garden that was now producing more vegetables than they could eat, and she'd learned to preserve the excess in jars for winter. The herd had grown to 200 head, healthy and thriving on good grass and careful management. Turner had built a new corral and expanded the barn. With the legal protection from the marshal's office, the harassment from Wardlow and Brennan had stopped completely. They still weren't friendly. Catherine Brennan crossed the street rather than speak to Josephine in town, but they'd learned to leave the Turner ranch alone. Most importantly, the account books showed consistent profit. Not huge amounts, but steady. Enough to pay down debt, buy supplies, save for expansion. Enough to breathe. One afternoon in late July, Josephine was working in the garden when she heard horses approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and recognized Mrs. Fletcher riding in a borrowed wagon with Deputy Webb driving. "Ellen?" Josephine set down her hoe, confused. Mrs. Fletcher never came out to the ranch. "What's wrong?" Mrs. Fletcher climbed down from the wagon with Webb's help, her face flushed from heat and something that looked like excitement. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. I had to tell you in person." "Tell me what?" "Thomas Brennan's leaving Cedar Bend, he and Catherine. They're moving back east, Philadelphia, actually. Isn't that something?" Mrs. Fletcher fanned herself with her hand. "Wardlow's furious. The whole arrangement fell apart. Turns out Thomas has been gambling, lost significant money. Wardlow found out and withdrew his support. Now they're broke and leaving in disgrace." Josephine absorbed this information slowly. Thomas, returning to Philadelphia. The city she'd fled, desperate for something better. The irony wasn't lost on her. "When?" she asked. "End of the week. They're selling everything. The ranch, the cattle, all of it. Wardlow's buying it back at a fraction of what he paid, just to save face." Mrs. Fletcher's eyes were bright with the kind of satisfaction that came from seeing karma work. "Catherine came by the boarding house yesterday crying. Said she never wanted this life anyway. That Thomas promised her something different." "She said that to you?" "She did. Also said—" Mrs. Fletcher hesitated. "She said you were right. About everything." Josephine thought about Catherine standing on that boardwalk, angry and hurt and lashing out because it was easier than facing the truth about her own situation. She thought about all the ways they were similar, both women who'd been used by Thomas, both trapped by choices they'd made or had made for them. "I should talk to her," Josephine said, "before they leave." Turner, who'd come up from the barn during this conversation, shook his head. "You don't owe her anything." "I know, but I want to anyway." The next day, Josephine rode into Cedar Bend alone. She found Catherine at the Brennan house, or what used to be the Brennan house, supervising workers who were packing up furniture. Catherine looked thinner than Josephine remembered, her perfect curls wilted in the heat, her dress wrinkled. "Josephine," Catherine's voice was flat, exhausted. "Come to gloat?" "No, I came to see if you needed anything." Catherine laughed, a bitter sound. "What could you possibly give me that I'd want?" "Maybe nothing. Maybe just someone who understands." Josephine stepped closer. "I know what it's like to have everything fall apart. To realize the man you married isn't who you thought he was. It's not the same. You chose your situation. Mine was chosen for me. You think I chose to be abandoned at a stage stop, to marry a stranger out of desperation?" Josephine shook her head. "We both got dealt bad hands by Thomas. The difference is what we did after." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, younger. "I was awful to you. I know I was. I hated that you seemed to be making it work when I couldn't. You could have made it work. You just didn't want to work that hard." "No, I didn't." Catherine met her eyes. "I'm not like you. I'm not strong enough to build something from nothing. I need—" She gestured vaguely. "Easier things, softer things. Then maybe Philadelphia will suit you better." "Maybe." Catherine's laugh was sad this time. "Thomas thinks he can restart there, find some job, live on credit until he makes it big. He doesn't understand that he's the problem, not the location." "Are you going to tell him?" "Would it matter? He doesn't listen." Catherine turned back to the packing workers. "Thank you for coming. I don't deserve your kindness, but thank you anyway." Josephine left feeling strange, not triumphant, just sad. She'd thought revenge would feel better, that seeing Catherine and Thomas fail would somehow vindicate her own suffering. Instead, it just felt hollow. Their failure didn't erase what they'd done to her, but it also didn't make her success mean more. She'd built her life despite them, not because of them. That realization settled something inside her that had been restless since the day she'd stepped off that stagecoach. By fall, Josephine noticed changes in her body that she'd been trying to ignore. Morning sickness that lasted into afternoons, exhaustion that sleep didn't cure. Breasts tender enough that even her work dress hurt. She'd been pregnant before, or thought she might have been, years ago in Philadelphia, a scare that had turned out to be nothing but worry and irregular cycles. This felt different. This felt real. She waited until she was certain before telling Turner. They were in the barn one evening, checking on a horse with a swollen hoof, when she finally spoke. "I'm pregnant." Turner's hand stilled on the horse's leg. He looked up at her, his expression impossible to read. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor. 3 months along, I think." He stood slowly, his gaze moving to her stomach, which didn't show anything yet beneath her loose work dress. That's good, right? That's good news." "I don't know. Is it?" Josephine hadn't meant to sound uncertain, but the words came out that way. "A baby changes everything, changes how much I can work, what I can do. It'll be harder for you, having to pick up my slack." "That's not what I'm worried about." Turner crossed to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I'm worried about you. Childbirth out here, it's dangerous. No real doctor, just the midwife from town, and she's old and half blind, I know." Josephine had heard the stories. Women dying in childbirth wasn't uncommon anywhere, but on the frontier it was practically expected. "I'm scared too. We'll get through it, together." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she might break. "You're the toughest person I know. If anyone can do this, you can." "That's not how childbirth works. Being tough doesn't make you less likely to bleed to death." "No, but it means you'll fight, and I'll be right there with you." He kissed her forehead. "We wanted to build something that lasts. This is part of that." Josephine pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar smell of him, sweat and leather and sun-baked earth. "I'm terrified." "Good. Means you understand what's at stake." He pulled back to look at her. "But we've faced scary things before. We'll face this too." Over the following months, as her belly grew and her body changed in ways both wonderful and uncomfortable, Turner adapted with the kind of practical problem-solving he brought to every ranch challenge. He took over the heavy lifting without being asked. He hired a local boy to help with daily chores so Josephine could rest more. He read every book on pregnancy and childbirth he could find, studying them with the same intensity he applied to cattle breeding guides. "Says here you should eat liver for iron," he announced one evening, looking up from a medical text he'd ordered from Fort Worth. "I hate liver. I'll cook it with onions. You won't taste it as much." "I'll still taste it." But she ate it anyway because he was trying, and that mattered more than the taste. Winter came hard that year, with early snows and temperatures that dropped low enough to freeze water solid in the troughs. Josephine, 7 months pregnant and moving like a boat in rough seas, watched from the window as Turner battled the weather to keep the cattle fed and alive. "You should come inside," she called from the porch one afternoon. "You've been out there for 6 hours. Need to finish breaking the ice in the south pasture. Cattle can't drink if the creek's frozen solid. You'll freeze solid if you don't warm up." He came in eventually, his face red with cold, his hands so numb he could barely grip the coffee cup she pressed into them. She made him sit by the fire while she heated soup, her movements awkward around her swollen belly. "Shouldn't you be resting?" he asked. "I've been resting all day. I'm going crazy." She ladled soup into bowls. "I used to run a factory floor. Now I can't even reach my own feet to put on boots. 4 more weeks, then you'll have your body back. Then I'll have a screaming infant who needs constant attention. It's not exactly a return to independence." Turner was quiet for a moment. "Are you having second thoughts? About the baby?" "No, just adjusting my expectations." Josephine sat heavily beside him, her back aching. "I thought I'd figured out how to do this. How to be a partner, run a ranch, build a life. Now everything's changing again, and I don't know if I can keep up." "You don't have to keep up. You just have to be you. That's been enough so far." "Has it? For me it has." He set down his soup bowl and took her hand. Listen, I know this is scary. I know you're giving up a lot. Your mobility, your independence, your ability to work the way you want. But you're not giving up yourself. You're still the woman who drove cattle to Fort Worth and negotiated our first real sale. You're still the woman who faced down Catherine Brennan and didn't blink. Having a baby doesn't erase any of that. It changes it, though. Everything changes. That's life. He squeezed her hand. But we adapt, same as always. The baby came on a frozen February night when the stars were so bright they looked sharp enough to cut. Josephine's water broke around midnight, and Turner rode immediately for the midwife, pushing his horse hard through snow-covered roads. Mrs. Henley, the midwife, arrived an hour later, a wizened woman who'd delivered half the babies in Cedar Bend and buried almost as many mothers. She examined Josephine with hands that knew their business, her expression grave. "First baby?" Mrs. Henley asked. "Yes." "You're strong. That helps. But it'll be a long night, maybe longer." She turned to Turner. "Boil water, get clean linens. Then stay out of my way unless I call for you." The labor lasted 18 hours. Josephine had thought she understood pain, had thought the broken ribs from falling off Dove last spring, or the time she'd burned her hand on the stove, or even the constant ache of hard physical work prepared her. She'd been wrong. This was pain on a different scale entirely, consuming and relentless, wave after wave with no respite. She tried not to scream. Failed. Tried to stay calm and focused like Mrs. Henley instructed. Failed at that too. By the 14th hour, she was begging for it to stop, to end, anything to make the pain stop. "Can't stop now," Mrs. Henley said, her voice maddeningly calm. "Baby's almost here. You push when I tell you. Understand?" "I can't." "Yes, you can. You're doing it right now, whether you think you can or not." Mrs. Henley's wrinkled face was stern. "Now push." Josephine pushed and pushed and pushed until she thought something inside her would tear apart. Then finally, relief so sudden it felt like falling, the baby was out. "It's a girl," Mrs. Henley announced, holding up a tiny, squalling creature covered in blood and vernix. "Healthy lungs, that's for certain." Josephine lay back against the pillows, exhausted beyond anything she'd ever experienced. Her body felt like it had been torn apart and hastily reassembled. But when Mrs. Henley placed the cleaned baby in her arms, wrapped in soft cloth, something shifted inside her. The baby was small, impossibly small. Red-faced and wrinkled, with a thatch of dark hair and eyes that couldn't quite focus yet. She was screaming, furious at being thrust into cold air and bright light. "Hello," Josephine whispered, and the baby quieted slightly, responding to her voice. "Hello, little one." Turner appeared in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. He'd clearly heard every moment of the labor from the other room. Are you?" "We're fine," Josephine said, though fine seemed inadequate for what she felt. "Come meet your daughter." He approached slowly, like the baby might break if he looked at her wrong. When he finally held her, his big, work-roughened hands impossibly gentle, his expression transformed into something Josephine had never seen before. "She's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She's wrinkled and loud. Still perfect." He looked up at Josephine. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names during the pregnancy, but never settled on one. Now, looking at her daughter, what an impossible thing, Josephine knew what felt right. "Sarah, after your mother." Turner's eyes went bright with unshed tears. His mother had died when he was 12, a loss he rarely spoke about but carried in everything he did. "You mean that?" "Yes. Sarah Turner. It's a strong name." "It's a perfect name." He sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the baby with that careful gentleness. "Thank you. For her. For everything." Mrs. Henley cleared her throat. "Touching as this is, the mother needs rest and the baby needs to nurse. Out you go, Father." The first weeks with Sarah were the hardest of Josephine's life. The baby woke every 2 hours to nurse, screaming until Josephine's milk let down. Her breasts were cracked and bleeding. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept more than 90 minutes at a stretch. The house smelled perpetually of sour milk and dirty diapers. And she'd never been happier. It made no sense. She was exhausted beyond reason. Her body ached in new ways. She couldn't do half the ranch work she'd been managing before. But when she looked at Sarah, at her tiny fingers grasping at air, her unfocused eyes slowly learning to track movement, her toothless gums working as she nursed. Something inside Josephine expanded to make room for love she hadn't known she was capable of. "She smiled at me today," Josephine announced one evening, even though she knew Sarah was too young for real smiles. A real smile. "Probably gas," Turner said, but he was grinning too. He was besotted with his daughter, completely gone. He'd hold her for hours, just watching her sleep, his expression soft in a way it never was for anything else. "It was a smile. I saw it. If you say so." They were both lying. They both knew it. Neither cared. Spring brought calving season again, and Josephine had to make peace with not being able to help as much as she wanted. Turner hired 2 local men part-time, enough to manage the work she couldn't do while caring for Sarah. It grated against her pride, having to step back, having to depend on hired help when she'd always pulled her weight. "It's temporary," Turner reminded her when she complained. "Sarah will get bigger. You'll have more time. We'll adjust." "I hate not being useful." "You're growing a human being. That's useful." He was changing Sarah's diaper with the practiced competence he brought to everything, though his nose wrinkled at the smell. "Besides, you're still managing the books, planning the sales, running the house. That's not nothing. It feels like less. Then you've forgotten what this place was like before you came. We're doing better than we ever have. That's because of you. Your planning, your negotiating, your smart decisions." He finished the diaper and scooped up Sarah, who cooed at him happily. "Don't sell yourself short just because you can't rope cattle right now." By summer, they'd fallen into a new rhythm. Sarah was 5 months old, chunky and cheerful, sleeping through most nights. Josephine had healed enough to work again, though she kept Sarah with her, rigged up in a sling Turner had fashioned so she could have her hands free. They made another cattle drive to Fort Worth, this time with 30 head and 2 hired hands to help. Dixon bought them all at $42 each, with a handshake agreement for first purchase rights on their next drive. "You've built something here," Dixon said to them at the final meeting. "When I first saw you 2 years ago, I figured you for desperate folks who'd fold within a season. I was wrong." "We're stubborn," Turner said. "You're smart," Dixon corrected. "Stubborn's common. Smart's rare." He nodded to Josephine, who had Sarah strapped to her chest, the baby's dark hair visible above the blanket. "That baby's going to grow up on a real working ranch. Not many kids can say that anymore." On the ride home, Josephine felt something settle inside her that had been unsettled since the day she'd stepped off that stagecoach. She'd built this. Her and Turner together, yes, but she'd been essential to it. Her work, her decisions, her refusal to quit. All of it had mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Turner asked, riding beside her with Sarah asleep against his chest. "About how far we've come. How different everything is from what I expected." "Better or worse?" Josephine looked at him, her husband, her partner, her friend. She looked at Sarah, sleeping peacefully. She looked at the land stretching around them, harsh and beautiful in theirs. "Better," she said. "So much better than I ever imagined." That fall, word reached them that Thomas and Catherine Brennan had returned to Philadelphia only to discover that the city had no interest in a disgraced couple with no money and no prospects. Thomas had tried various schemes, none successful, before finally accepting a low-level clerk position at a shipping company. They lived in a cramped apartment in a neighborhood Thomas would have once considered beneath him. Mrs. Fletcher, who'd heard all this from her cousin in Philadelphia, relayed the information during one of her visits to the ranch. She'd taken to coming out once a month, bringing supplies and news, staying overnight in Josephine's old room. "Should we feel sorry for them?" Mrs. Fletcher asked. Josephine was nursing Sarah in the rocking chair Turner had built, the baby's small hand resting against her breast. "I don't know. Part of me does. Nobody deserves to be that miserable. They made their choices. So did I. I got lucky that mine worked out. Luck had nothing to do with it." Mrs. Fletcher's voice was firm. "You worked. You fought. You built something from nothing. That's not luck. That's determination." Still, things could have gone differently if Turner had been dishonest, if the ranch had failed, if I'd died in childbirth. Josephine looked down at Sarah, who'd fallen asleep nursing, milk-drunk and content. "There's always luck involved." "Maybe. But you made your own opportunities." Mrs. Fletcher smiled. "That Catherine never could have done what you've done. She doesn't have it in her. No, I suppose she doesn't. That evening, after Mrs. Fletcher had gone to bed and Sarah was asleep in her cradle, Josephine stood on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was on fire, orange and pink and purple bleeding together in ways that never looked real even when you were seeing them. Turner came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, comfortable in a way she'd never been comfortable with anyone. "Happy?" he asked. "Yes, are you?" "More than I thought possible." He rested his chin on top of her head. "When I proposed to you, I thought I was solving a problem, getting help for the ranch. I didn't expect—" He paused, searching for words. "This. Us. What we've built together."
Neither did I. Josephine turned in his arms to face him. "I came here expecting romance and got hard work instead. Turns out hard work builds something stronger than romance ever could." "Is that a complaint?" "It's an observation." She kissed him, slow and sweet. "I love you. Not despite the hard work, but because of it. Because we built this together. I love you too. Even when you're stubborn and won't rest when you should. Even when you snore and leave your boots in the middle of the floor. Especially then." They stood together on the porch, two people who'd started as strangers brought together by desperation and circumstance. They'd made something real from that desperate beginning, a working ranch, a functional partnership, and eventually a love that had snuck up on them through shared struggle and mutual respect. It wasn't the fairy tale Josephine had once imagined. It was better. Because it was real, earned through work and persistence and refusing to give up when things got hard. Because it was built on honesty rather than pretty promises. Because they'd chosen each other, not once in a rushed proposal, but every day through their actions and commitment. Winter came again, their third together. Sarah was walking now, toddling through the house with the kind of fearless confidence only children have. She had Turner's gray eyes and Josephine's dark hair, and a stubborn streak that promised future challenges. One evening, after Sarah was asleep, Josephine sat down with the account books to review their year. The numbers told a story of steady growth, cattle sales up, expenses down, debt almost completely paid off. They'd turned a real profit, enough to expand further or save for harder times. "We did it," she said to Turner, who was mending a bridle by lamplight. "The ranch is profitable, solidly profitable." "How much?" She told him. His eyebrows rose. "That's good. That's real good. It means we can hire permanent help, expand the herd to 300 head, maybe buy that parcel north of here when it comes up for sale." Josephine closed the ledger. "It means we've made it. Because of you, your planning, your management, your negotiations." "Because of us," she corrected. "You work yourself half to death keeping this place running. I just make sure we get paid fairly for it." "Fair enough, us." He set aside the bridle. "You know what this means?" "What?" "Your year's up. Has been for a while now." He looked at her steadily. "You could leave if you wanted. I'd honor the agreement. Pay passage anywhere you want to go." Josephine laughed. "You think I'm leaving now, after all this?" "Just making sure you know you have the choice, that you're staying because you want to, not because you feel trapped." She crossed to where he sat, settling onto his lap, despite being too old for such things. He held her anyway, his arms solid and sure around her. "I'm staying because this is home," she said. "Because you're my partner, and my husband, and the father of my child. Because we built this together, and I want to see what else we can build." "Good." His voice was rough with emotion. "Because I don't know what I'd do without you. Don't want to find out." "You won't have to." They sat together in the lamplight, comfortable, in silence. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie, but inside the house was warm, safe, home. Sarah's first word was mama. Her second was dada. Her third, inexplicably, was cow. "That's my girl," Turner said proudly. "Growing up a real rancher." By the time Sarah was 2, Josephine was pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect. The pregnancy was easier, her body knew what to do, and she didn't panic at every discomfort. The labor was shorter, only 8 hours, and produced a son they named James after Josephine's maternal grandfather. 2 children, Turner said, holding James while Sarah patted her baby brother's head with the kind of rough gentleness only toddlers possess. "We're becoming a real family." "We've been a real family," Josephine said from the bed,
exhausted but content. This just makes it bigger. The ranch continued to grow. They bought the northern parcel, expanding their holdings to 600 acres. They hired 2 full-time hands, including the boy who'd helped during Sarah's infancy, now grown into a capable young man. Their herd reached 300 head, all healthy and thriving. And slowly, their reputation spread. Other ranchers started asking Turner for advice on breeding and management. Buyers sought them out specifically, knowing Turner stock was quality. The Turner Ranch became a name that meant something in the territory: honest dealing, hard work, and steady success. 5 years after Josephine had stepped off that stagecoach, betrayed and desperate, she stood on the porch of the house she'd helped build, watching her husband teach their daughter to rope a fence post while their son napped inside. The ranch sprawled around them, prosperous and solid. The account books showed consistent profit. The future looked secure in a way it never had before. Mrs. Fletcher visited that afternoon, bringing news from town. "You'll never guess who's moving to Cedar Bend." "Who?" "Catherine Brennan." "Well, Catherine Morris now. She divorced Thomas last year, took back her maiden name. She's starting a dress shop. Her father's backing it, trying to rebuild bridges." Mrs. Fletcher's expression was complicated. "She asked about you, wanted to know if you'd be willing to see her." Josephine thought about this. The old anger had faded years ago, replaced by something closer to indifference. Catherine couldn't hurt her anymore. She'd proven that by building a life that didn't depend on anyone's approval or anyone's cruelty. Tell her yes. She can visit when she's settled. Catherine came 2 weeks later, driving a small buggy and looking nervous. She'd lost the sharp edges that had made her so cutting before. Now she just looked tired and a little sad, but also determined. "Thank you for seeing me," Catherine said, accepting the tea Josephine offered. They sat on the porch while Sarah and James played in the yard under Turner's watchful eye. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because I was cruel to you, unnecessarily cruel." Catherine stared into her tea. "I blamed you for my own unhappiness. That wasn't fair." "No, it wasn't. I'm trying to be different now, build something of my own without my father's interference or a husband's name." She smiled slightly. "It's harder than I expected." "It usually is." "You make it look easy." Josephine laughed. "It's not easy. It's never been easy. But it's worth it." She gestured at the ranch, the children, the life she'd built. "This took work, constant, exhausting work. But it's mine, ours. We earned it. I never wanted to work that hard. I wanted things to be easy." Catherine set down her teacup. "That's why I failed. I kept waiting for easy, and it never came." "Easy never comes. You just get stronger." They talked for another hour, and when Catherine left, something had shifted. Not friendship. They'd never be friends. But understanding. A recognition that they were both women trying to build lives in a world that didn't make it easy, that they'd chosen different paths and gotten different results. "You were kind to her," Turner observed that evening. "Why shouldn't I be? She can't hurt me anymore. She's just a woman trying to start over, same as I did." "You're generous." "I'm practical. Holding grudges takes energy I'd rather spend elsewhere." Josephine leaned against him. "Besides, I won. Not in a spiteful way, but in every way that matters. I have a good life. She's still figuring out hers. I can afford to be kind." As the years continued to turn, Josephine sometimes thought about the girl she'd been when she'd arrived in Texas. Naive and desperate, heartbroken and scared. That girl had thought she needed someone to take care of her, to provide security and comfort. That girl had believed in promises and fairy tales. The woman she'd become knew better. She'd learned that security came from your own hands, your own work, your own refusal to quit. That the best partnerships were built on honesty and shared struggle, not pretty words and easy promises. That love wasn't something that swept you off your feet, but something you built together, one day at a time, through choices and commitment. She'd learned that life didn't follow the stories she'd been told, that happy endings weren't really endings at all, just new beginnings that required the same work and determination as everything else. That the most valuable things were the ones you earned through sweat and persistence, not the ones you were given. Standing on her porch at sunset, watching Turner play with their children while the ranch hummed with productive life around them, Josephine understood something fundamental. She'd come to Texas looking for rescue and found something better. She'd rescued herself. She'd taken a desperate situation and turned it into triumph, not through luck or someone else's kindness, but through her own strength and refusal to be broken. That was the real story. Not a romance, but something deeper. A woman who'd been betrayed and abandoned, who'd faced that betrayal head on and built a life from the wreckage. A woman who'd learned that the only person who could save her was herself, and that once she understood that, nothing could stop her. The fairy tales had been wrong. The best endings weren't the ones where someone swept in to save you. They were the ones where you saved yourself, built something real with your own hands, and stood in the life you'd created knowing you'd earned every bit of it. That night, as Josephine lay in bed with Turner's arm around her and their children sleeping safely in the next room, she thought about the question he'd asked years ago. Was she happy? Yes. She was happy. Not because life was easy or perfect, but because it was real and earned and hers. Because she'd faced the worst and survived it, had built something beautiful from desperate beginnings, had proven to herself that she was strong enough to handle whatever came. The ranch would face more challenges. There would be hard years and losses and setbacks, but she knew now that she could handle them. That she and Turner together could weather any storm, could build through any difficulty, could create something lasting from honest work and mutual respect. That was the real happy ending. Not perfection, but resilience. Not ease, but strength. Not a fantasy, but a life worth living, built by her own hands and filled with love that had been earned rather than promised. And as she drifted off to sleep, Josephine smiled, content in a way she'd never been when she'd believed in fairy tales and empty promises. This was better. This was real. This was hers.